thunder rumbled near the estate. Everyone is happy that he has finally been born, and then they say that they need to bring the crystal as soon as possible. This is a system, because the color of the crystal will show them what attribute was given to the newborn baby, whom the maid is holding in her arms. The maid is driving a cart with a crystal. The father of the child proudly declares that this is the second child of the Lakewood offspring, and he is sure that their baby is endowed with great power. Mom is silent and comes to her senses after giving birth. The maid brings the baby's hand to the crystal, and everyone gathers to see what he gets. The parents of the baby could not believe what they had just seen with their own eyes, and it does not seem to them that this is possible. Starting from the very beginning, the main character's name is Kiyama Zenichi. After graduating from high school, he managed to become an employee in a company with successful refineries, even though it was no longer important at all. The main character is in heaven. A boy with long hair stands in front of him and he asks for his forgiveness because it seems to him that Kiyama was born in the wrong world. The main character found himself in such a situation because he died protecting a child from a car. This boy, to his great surprise, turned out to be a god in front of him in heaven. The boy continued the dialogue with him and said that up to this point, the main character was just dragging out his existence in an unsuitable and disagreeable world. He tells him that Kiyama will go to the world in which he was originally supposed to be born. God assures him that this world will suit him well, so the main character should like it. But when he heard this, he just stood silently and did not say anything in response. This is how Kiyama's second life began, which was filled with hope in a new world. However, having been reborn in a different world in a new family, after his hand was brought to the ball was completely black. The father of the family simply could not believe that a scion with a black crystal could be born in their family. The maids were horrified after what they saw. They could not believe that the baby had the attribute of darkness. His mother only asked how a demonic child could be born in their family at all. The main character is lying in a crib because he has just been reborn, but still he does not understand the horror of all those present. He wonders if they are really saying that he is a demonic child. The father of the family loudly declared that this child would be a big stain on the history of their family, and he believes that the main character should not have been born at all. His wife tries to calm him down and says that this is why they have a second son, whose name is Leo, and whom she is currently holding in her arms. After that, she suggests to her husband to pretend that the main character died during childbirth. Kiyama cringes in fear, wondering if they really want to kill him or not. The father of the family put the newborn child somewhere, and the main character himself was only interested in why this world was much worse than the one in which he lived before. Sometime later, Kiyama can't figure out if he really sees a light in front of him after he opens his eyes, and the next thing he sees is the happy faces of a man and a woman who look at him without breaking their gaze. The man and the woman continue to talk and notice that the main character has a very intelligent look. After that, they ask him to pay attention to his new home, which is located behind their backs. However, Kayami is haunted by these questions. Who are these people standing in front of him and where he is at all? But a little later, he assumes that apparently he was taken out of the house under the cover of night. As it turned out, the main character was adopted by his uncle. The thought that he was alive made him so happy that he began to cry, thereby making his uncle and aunt nervous. His wife assumes that the main character was seasick all night in the carriage, and therefore he felt bad. Without thinking twice, she takes the baby in her arms and, hugging him, says that now everything will be fine with him, and he has nothing to worry about anymore. These words calm Kiyama down, and after that he begins to closely observe his aunt. The kid's uncle says that, on top of everything else, the sun finally came out today, although it rained like a bucket yesterday. As if even the sun was glad to see this baby born. Then the man asks his wife, it's okay if he gives the newborn baby the name Kyle. The woman, still holding the main character in her arms, asks him about it. The man tells her that he wants to call him that, because in the ancient language it translates as son, but his wife is not completely sure. And the man, pleased with the invented name, asks her if she likes it, and if he didn't come up with it well. The kid is looking directly at the sun. Parents look at the baby carefully, because he is glowing with happiness. He liked the name he had chosen, because it means the sun, and immediately smiled. They say that from now on, this place will be his home, and that's how the main character's new life began in a new family. 5 years later, Kyle is asked to hurry up and get out faster, because it's time for them to leave. The main character slowly leaves the estate and answers her that he will approach them now, after which he calls her mom. In this world, his name is Kyle Flayfield. The husband and wife are sitting in the carriage. The man clarifies whether no one has forgotten anything. These people are the Fleafields. The gentleman's name is Damio, and the lady's name is Clay. The boy runs as fast as he can to his parents in the carriage because they are going on a trip with the whole family again. Before getting into the carriage, the main character calls Al and Max and says that he hopes for them and at the same time smiles radiantly at them. The knights raised their hands in the air as a sign that they had heard the boy, and all because it was these two knights who would accompany them. Damio Fleafield tells his servants and the butler from the window that he hopes for them and asks them to look after their house while they are away, to which the servants deeply bow to him in response. He turned 5 this year. Clay enthusiastically says that she is very happy about this trip because she has not gone to Aras for a long time, and the boy's father tells him that there is a great view of the sea to the place where they are going and offered to go and see. The boy gives him his positive answer and breaks into a smile, and starting from the night when the main character was reborn in this world, he lived a completely happy life, surrounded by caring parents. But naturally, he did not forget about the events of that night when the crystal was completely black when he touched it. That's why Kyle decided to find out more about this world as well as about the magic in it. After studying, he learned that magic in this world is divided into 8 attributes, such as earth, water, fire, wind, ice, lightning, darkness, and light. But a person by nature can have only one of the previously mentioned attributes. A person's attribute can be recognized by changing the color of the magic crystal that he touches. Blue is for water, red is for fire, and so on. Usually, a person's attribute is recognized immediately after his birth, and this will greatly affect his life. The crystal of the main character himself turned black. This means only one thing, that his attribute is darkness. Or rather, it is an attribute possessed by demons. When the boy carefully read this information in the book, he became sad without noticing it. Then his foster mom told him that he shouldn't worry at all about what color he has. These words took Kyle by surprise, and he finally realized that these people had known about everything from the very beginning. Even so, they were able to shelter him. While in the carriage and on his way to Aras, the main character thought deeply about what happened during these 5 years and how he was sheltered. His foster father noticed his serious expression and decided to ask what was wrong with him because he looked like he was thinking about something serious. But this only shocked Kyle, because he did not expect such insight from a man. The boy's dad wondered if he was planning what he would do when they arrived at the designated place. Sighing with relief that he hadn't guessed his thoughts, the boy simply agreed to be a father. Still, he feels embarrassed that he has remembered that very night again. However, now he is really happy and nothing prevents him. He remembers God, who told him that the main character should enjoy his new life. Kyle just thanks him for it. Sometime later, they have already pierced some part of the road. The man says that they will have to drive through the forest, and it looks like he is also worried now. Then he asks if Kyle is worried, to which he answers in the affirmative, but the main character still does not understand what is happening at the moment. After all, as soon as they were in the forest, he sensed something was wrong. It seems to him that something bad is clearly ahead. He suddenly realizes something for himself. Kyle abruptly asks his foster father to stop the carriage as soon as possible. He doesn't understand what the problem is and what happened to Kyle. The boy explains to him that there are a whole bunch of monsters on this road they are driving along. His father cannot understand what other monsters they are, after which he calms his son, saying that Al is monitoring the situation from the front right now, and as soon as he comes, the boy will see that everything is in order. He told Max that they needed to find a new way as soon as possible, because the screams of monsters could be heard in front. Max was in shock, and he asked if Al was sure about this. Kyle's mom asks her son how he found out about this, but he only thinks that the monsters attacked. He immediately runs to the exit of the carriage, but is briefly stopped by his father's voice. Kyle turned to him and explained that the monsters had attacked someone, and therefore he had to help. The parents cannot believe what they have heard, and jumping up from their seats, the father cannot understand what the boy is talking about at all, and the mother, in turn, asks the main character to sit back in his seat. He does not obey them and asks for forgiveness for this, after which he explains that he has long read all the books about magic, and that he has been able to conjure for a long time, but without having time to do anything. His parents remain sitting in the carriage. Trapped by the barrier that Kyle created, the soldier silently watches and is shocked. He cannot believe whether he really sees a wind barrier in front of him. A second later, the main character asks Al for forgiveness and directs his magic, or rather wind bullets, in his direction. The soldier does not manage to dodge them in time, and therefore ends up on the ground, leaving his horse without a rider. This is exactly what Kyle wanted. He gets on a horse as soon as possible, and asks the parents sitting in the carriage and Al, who fell from the horse, to stay in place and not go anywhere. After that, he asks his foster parents for forgiveness and explains to them that he simply cannot leave people to their fate. But the parents, getting out of the carriage, try to stop him, but they can't do it. The main character understands perfectly well how they feel at the moment. In this life, his own parents had already abandoned him, but even in his case, there were people ready to shelter someone who could turn out to be a demon. That is why he will never leave them, and after that he begins to ride a horse even faster and harder to save people. Meanwhile, the place that the monster attacked. The knight tells the others to stay in position and protect the carriage behind them at all costs, no matter what. Still, he can't understand how this could happen. And how could they face ordinary goblins, goblin spellcasters, wild wolves, and even orcs? And by his count, there are only about 3 of them. He still doesn't understand how it was possible to run into all these monsters while escorting a young lady. The girl only watched them from the carriage windows, and the knight told his comrades not to let the monsters break through, no matter what. The goblins rushed to attack the knights. They froze in horror and could not move. The wild wolves headed straight for the carriage. Their commander wondered if their target was really a carriage because they had surrounded them. While the captain was fighting, it dawns on him that they won't last long like this. But all of a sudden, someone uses a spell called Windblade. It flies straight at the target and destroys the orc and everything around it with its deafening explosion. The captain looks at the man who did it. It turned out to be Kyle, who rode up on a horse. He sighed wearily and was still glad that he had enough power for such a blow, because it was the first time he had managed to try it on enemies. All the knights stood in complete shock and wondered that this boy possessed wind magic. The captain also stood in complete confusion and could not believe what he saw, because this boy is just a child. After that, Kyle gets off the horse to the ground and asks her to leave. That punch made the monsters angry. They came close to the carriage and the knights with the boy again. The captain realizes that things are very bad, because the monsters have cornered them. While he was lost in his thoughts, the main character turned to the knights and asked them all to go to the carriage faster. They could not believe the words the boy had just said, and then the commander of their squad stepped in. While some doubted, he only menacingly ordered them to do what the boy told them. The main character used magic called the Wall of Light, thereby erecting a barrier around the carriage, thanks to which the monsters could not attack them and cause them at least some damage. The monsters only beat against the barrier. The captain can't believe that this is really light magic, because recently only the boy used wind magic. Kaio, meanwhile, rolling up his sleeves, was only pleased with himself and said that now he could walk around. Both the monsters and the knights looked at him in bewilderment and could not understand what they should expect from him. Nevertheless, the main character explained to them that even so, they should not think that he was going to waste his precious time on them. Just a second later, he pointed his hand high into the sky and used a spell called Rain Call. The captain is watching him and can't believe if he's really using a water spell right now. He wonders how many attributes the main character has. The monsters are also terrified, but only from the thickening clouds above their heads. Kyle waves his hand again in front of the oncoming pile of monsters. He says goodbye to them all and, without lowering his hand, uses a spell called Electric Rain. All the monsters just burn alive, and in a second, only ashes remain from them. The knights watched his actions closely, and they couldn't believe if he really combined the magic of water and lightning. Rubbing his forehead with sweat, Kyle is glad that it's finally over, and the captain can't figure out who the main character is and why he has such incredible power. When Kyle walked past the corpses of monsters, he decides that it is best to send them to a shadow vault, because it is not the best solution to leave their carcasses lying in the middle of the road, and the captain cannot believe that he also owns the magic of darkness. Still, he still can't figure out exactly who this boy is. He, in turn, takes and turns around right in front of the captain and says that his work is over and asks them to take care of themselves. After that, he just waves goodbye to them, but the commander asks him to stop. He shouts and asks him to wait at least a minute. The young lady who has been sitting in the carriage all this time is carefully watching Kyle leave. She wonders who he really was. The main character, in turn, runs to his family as soon as possible. The young lady, no longer seeing his fleeing body, realizes that he has left after all. Sometime later, after he came back to his parents, he saw a frustrated Al, an angry father, and a saddened mother. He just looked at them and didn't say anything to them. After which he decided to ask if they were really mad at him. His father told him that they were naturally angry. His mother added that she just couldn't find a place for herself while the boy was away. After that, Al joined the conversation, saying that they were, of course, glad that Kyle was safe and sound, but he asked him not to forget that it was their job to protect him. Max, who is sitting on a horse, tells Al that he is wrong, and his partner cannot understand what exactly. Then Max explains to him that when he followed the young gentleman, an indescribable sight appeared before him. They would all have died if the main character had not defeated that horde of monsters. All those present were shocked after hearing what they heard. He also said that the young master, with his magic of wind, water, and lightning, did not leave them any chance of survival. His father cannot believe that his son has the magic of wind, water, and lightning. He says that this is just complete nonsense, and all because the crystal showed that the attribute of the main character is darkness, but then doubts began to creep in. He decided to check with Carl about this, whether he was right. The boy was a little embarrassed and said that he had said everything correctly, and then promised his parents to tell them about everything at home. He will tell them about his power and the crystal. The father of the Flayfield family was horrified after listening to the main character and could not understand. His foster mother did not stay away either. She covered her mouth with her hand in surprise. The knights also stood in complete shock and had no right to even say something. Soon after, he awkwardly scratched his head, throwing his hand behind his head, and asked them to talk about it later and that it would be better for them to return home first. Sometime later, the Flayfield family's training ground. The main character runs past the maid, who has a tray in her hands and smiles sweetly at her. For his foster parents, he begins his explanations about magic. After that, he asks them to start by imagining that the ball of water is a magic crystal. Taking the bag from the tray, after he untied the rope and added all its contents to this ball, Kyle explained to them that this was an attribute of water, and he added blue to it. His parents began to watch this more closely. His father adjusted his glasses so as not to miss anything and noticed that the water had just turned crystal blue, and his mother at that time could not hide her shock because of the current situation. The main character gladly continued to explain everything to them and, holding the rest of the bags with unknown contents in his hands, only said that this was why he would add everything else. Starting to pour out the contents of each ring, he began to say that red is fire, brown is earth, green is wind, blue is ice, and purple is lightning. His father asked the boy to stop for at least a second. He asked him why he decided to add everything there, because Max had told them that the main character could only use wind, water, and lightning. His wife is relieved to conclude that Kyle can only use 3 elements. The boy reacts silently to this and brings a clenched fist to his mouth. After a second, he opens it, and from there you can see 5 magical elements, and only the main character wanted to explain what was happening to them. How his foster father had already guessed everything and clarified whether he really saw the 5 magical attributes in front of him. Kyle corrected him a little and said that including light and darkness, and showed them this while using his other hand. After that, he began to explain that if you mix white and black together, both parents were indescribably horrified by these words and could not believe what they heard. His adoptive father decided to clarify that when all the attributes were mixed together, wouldn't the water ball turn completely black? Then the boy confirmed his guesses. He explained that when he was born and touched that glass crystal, it was the same thing. That's why this crystal turned black, the color of darkness. While his father was deep in thought, his mother just couldn't believe it and stood in shock. Then the father of the Flayfield family seriously said that he understood him, specifically that he owns all the attributes, but he is interested in something. When exactly did the main character learn all this? Kyle was not confused by this question. He said it was very simple and that he had found a very interesting book in his foster father's library. The man was confused and taken aback for a few seconds, after which he asked if this was really his book. The main character gave him his positive answer, and continued to say that he, in turn, just took this book and studied from it and did nothing of the kind. After that, he lifted this book up, continuing to hold it in his hands, and the father of the Flayfield family recognized it, after which he said that it was a Rozek book, but the boy did not understand what his father meant. The man, adjusting his glasses, only stated that now everything became clear to him, because Razak is his old friend. Kyle couldn't believe this news, after which he asked his father if it was really true, and then said that it was very good. The father only smiled broadly, letting the boy know that he understood everything correctly, and his mother, standing next to her husband, also broke into a smile and awkwardly began to rub her neck while saying that it brings back memories. The boy also begins to smile brightly and warmly, looking at the book, which he hugs to himself and says that this book is very well suited for beginners, because it gives an explanation, and for amateurs, in turn, it gives a path for masters' development. The father listened to his son and noticed that his words were a good review of this book and that he would like Razak to hear these words too. However, he was interrupted by the maid, informing him that a guest had arrived, and the man wondered who it was at such a time. As soon as they left the estate, a man appeared in front of them, as if he had already heard the conversations of a man and immediately answered his question, who could it be? The stranger only said that his old friend. However, the girl in the hat noticed that the head of the Flayfield family had such an expression on his face, as if he did not want to see guests at all. After which she says it's pretty rude of him, and then asks if he feels the same way. As soon as the man got closer to his guest, he immediately recognized her, and his expression immediately changed. And he said that this was a familiar face. The main character was also shocked when he saw their newly arrived guest. The woman in the hat only said that they had not seen each other for a very long time and asked how they were doing here. Kyle still couldn't believe what he saw with his own eyes. Continuing to stare at this unfamiliar woman in a hat, he finally realized that a real elf was standing in front of him, and the realization of this caused him such delight. There are many different races in this world, and elves stand out from all the others, although they are very few, but they live for a very long time, and the amount of their magical power immediately exceeds that of other races. Clay joyfully greets his guest, saying that they have not been together for a long time and calls her Maluna. The husband asks the woman if she really came from the great forest, because the path was long. The woman in the hat says they're still happy. After that, she turns her gaze to the little boy standing in front of her and asks who he is and what he is doing here anyway. After that, the husband and wife approach the main character with their hands on the shoulders of the boy, smile brightly, and declare that this is their son, and his name is Kyle, and he is a very good boy. The woman couldn't believe it at first, so she was silent for a while and didn't know what to say to her at all, and then decided to clarify whether it was really their son or whether she misunderstood them. Still smiling dazzlingly, the father of the Flayfield family made it clear to the woman that she was right in her reasoning, after which the man turned to his son and asked him not to be shy in front of her. After all, this elf standing in front of him is the author of the book that he is holding in his hands right now, and the name of this guest is Maluna Razak. From this news, the boy could only open his mouth wide in surprise and stand silently, unable to say anything. The elf noticed his embarrassment and said that she herself would not be able to remember exactly when she wrote the book in the hands of the main character. Kyle was not confused by these words, and he broke into a smile, after which he said that it was thanks to Maluna Razak's book that he was able to learn magic, but the list of his achievements does not end there. He wanted to continue telling her how she interrupted him with her speeches and said that since this book turned out to be useful for him, she did not write it in vain. She is very pleased to hear this, after which she asked Kyle if he likes magic. To which the boy quickly gave her his answer that yes, or to be more precise, he likes her very, very much, saying these words. The smile did not leave his face. After which his parents approached him. His father joyfully declared that everything was exactly as the main character had said, and their son was a born genius. His mom added that Kyle can use many different spells. Maluna just listened to them in silence. After that, she sighed and clarified for decency whether this was true, but the Fleafields noticed the strange reaction of the elf. They understood what was going on, after which the father of the family asked if she really did not believe them. After that, Kyle's foster father asked him to show the woman in the hat his magic, and his foster mother asked the boy to surprise them all. Maluna only skeptically told the main character to surprise them. She just couldn't believe that the Fleafields would become such crazy parents. Then she asks the main character to show her his magic. She says that she will only defend herself and nothing more, and Kyle, in turn, she asks to attack with any spells. The boy is a little surprised, but still he agrees with her. They are facing each other, and his parents and all the servants in the house have moved aside so as not to interfere with them and only loudly begin to cheer Kyle. As if he did not hear them, he asks, turning to the elf, how much he should attack her. The girl was interested in his question, and she thought about it a little. After that, she replied at all that she was confident in her magic and that she was subject to as many as 3 attributes, so she could block almost everything, and she had nothing to fear. She asks the main character to attack her with all his strength and use his best spells. These words shock Kyle. After that, all his hands are completely wrapped in lightning. While the girl stuck her hand out to start acting and attacking the boy, the same, in turn, only says that he understood everything. He needs to strike with all his might. He put his hands in a certain position. This shocked the elf, because she could not have expected this at all, but the main character did not see her expression at all. He began his attack by raising his arms up, after which a large, unknown pillar appeared behind him, but it was clear that he was very strong and powerful. Kyle just said he would choose it, meaning the pillar behind him. Meluna is horrified and shocked because she can't believe and understand what the boy is doing, but she definitely feels the air around her shaking and it can't help but strain her. At this time, Kyle casts a spell in which he says that earth, water, fire, and wind should turn into spears of projection of his power. 4 different spears of each attribute appeared from this pillar. The woman in the hat just couldn't believe what she heard and saw with her own eyes. She can't believe that the main character can possess 4 attributes. Kyle, still without lowering his hand down, continues to recite a spell in which he says that ice, lightning, light, and darkness also turn into spears, that is, projections of his power. Meluna watches him closely and is simply horrified by what she sees. She cannot believe, and also accept, that the boy possesses all 8 attributes at once and at the same time. Kyle, armed with all his spears, which were aimed at the elf, only uttered a spell that said that all his 8 spears created by his power would become a projection of his true being. After that, all these spears joined together and became one whole and a large bow with a huge, single arrow. The main character pulled his bowstring and directed it at his opponent. This arrow went straight to Meluna, which she did not expect at all, and began to worry very much because it was somehow too much even for her. The boy's parents and all the servants of the house only began to cheer the main character even more so that he would not stop and continue. Meluna looked at the outsiders just watching this fight from the sidelines, and she was not happy at all, as was the attack. The only thing she wanted was for everyone to stop. After that, she raised her hand and put it in front of her, trying to somehow protect herself. But the guy, before sending his arrow, only said that it pierced absolutely everything in front, while calling it the arrow of 8 spears. The arrow of the 8 attributes was released and was aimed straight at Meluni. The woman, in turn, understood perfectly well that this was very bad for her, because this attack was strong even for her. She stuck her hand out in front of her and tried to summon the wind spirit that had signed a contract with her. She also wanted to summon someone, but stopped. Realizing that she did not have time for this at all, she simply began to panic and frantically come up with new ideas for ways to save herself. Then she hastily summoned Sylph, Dwarf, and Undine and ordered them to appear as soon as possible and protect her. A second later, the 3 of them appeared and went straight to that arrow. Sylph tried to stop her with her wall of wind. Undine called for a water dance. The dwarf summoned a stone barrier. A second later, a huge stone structure was formed in this place, into which the arrow flew. Only fear is visible on the elf's face, but the boy experiences emotions of anger and indignation, and after the arrow hit the stone structure. As a result, a huge explosion was delighted. The treacherous wind swept through the trees after the explosion. He also touched all the other people watching their fight from the sidelines. Only smoke was visible at the site of the explosion, but the elf and the boy were nowhere to be found, and then Kyle's parents began to worry. The father only noticed that he could not see anything and could not understand what had happened there, and the boy's mother was loudly shouting the names of the guest and her son, hoping that they would answer her in return. Meanwhile, at the very site of the explosion, Meluna picked up her hat. The mole flew off it during the shockwave, put it on herself, and noticed that it was quite dangerous. With the help of the summoning of the 3 elemental spirits, she only partially managed to block this blow. Still, she remembers that his magical power is simply monstrous and very strong. Suddenly, she is distracted from her thoughts by someone's voice, which says that there is a magic arrow behind her. This throws Maluna into shock, and she turns around sharply from fear and surprise and cannot believe what she has heard. As soon as she turned around, an arrow flew into her forehead, but it was an ordinary small and pear-shaped one with a suction cup. The girl sees the main character coming out of the dispersed fog and does not understand what just happened. The boy comes closer to her with a smile on his face, after which he begins to cough slightly and notices that there is too much dust in the air. It seems to him that he needs to put the whole earth back in place, after which he casts a spell in which he says calm. And, after a moment, a strong wind begins to blow, which almost blows the elf off her feet. As soon as this wind dissipates, the fog disappears, and the earth falls into place, as it was before the start of their duel. All those who watch this from the outside come, then delighted, then horrified, and do not fully understand how to react to them. Maluna, at the same time, stands silently and cannot say absolutely anything and only looks at Kyle attentively. He dusts off his hands, and then the elf realizes that this child is just incredibly strong. Sometime later, already being at the estate, the main character is sitting and drinking a drink warming his body, and Maluna and his parents are sitting at a separate table, not far behind him and calmly watching Kyle. The elf thinks to herself that when the main character does not do anything like that, he looks like a simple and very ordinary boy, after which she turns to his parents, that is, her friends. She wants to ask them her question again. She wonders who exactly this boy Kyle is, and who he is after all. This makes Damio and Clea quiet down and think a little before giving their answer. They simultaneously reply that Kyle is their beloved son and no one else. But this did not sound sincere at all to Maluna, from the word at all, and she only continued to look at them with a menacing expression on her face. She said that she understood everything, and in order not to bring up the subject anymore, she reassured them that this question was closed, and she assured them that she would never ask them again. The father of the Flayfield family only said that his son is a natural genius. His wife only said that Kyle is still a very diligent and good boy. Maluna only thinks about Celia that the Flayfield couple really dote on their son. She decided to offer them an idea. She asks her old friends if they would like to accidentally send their son to the State Academy of Magic. The main character heard what they were talking about. With joy, he jumped up and asked if she was really talking about the Magic Academy. The elf explains to him that people there learn to wield magic, find new friends, and simply acquire useful acquaintances. After that, she asks Kyle himself what he thinks about it. Does he really want to compare himself with other students gathered at the Magic Academy from all over the country? This information amazed the main character so much, but his eyes were just shining and he looked very happy. After which, after a short thought, he was a little embarrassed and said that he really wanted to get into and study at the Academy of Magic. Then the elf turned to his parents and asked if it was true. His father said that if his son really wants it, then they will let him go, and his mother only noticed that the boy would be the center of attention. Kyle ran over to hug his parents. Maluna thought about the fact that the Fleafields are very sad right now. Then the elf said that since they had decided everything, Kyle needed a tutor who would prepare him for the academy. After all, in noble families, children are prepared for this from an early age. The boy declares that he wants Maluna to teach him, but she tried to refuse it. However, Kyle explains to her that he learned everything from her book. He still doesn't understand a lot, but he already has a tutor in mind. He wants his teacher to be the person who wrote this book. Maluna thinks to herself that everything is right. After all, not everyone can help this boy curb all his strength. The girl says she understood him, but asks him to keep in mind that even though he is her friend's child, she will be very strict. But the guy just breaks into a smile, saying that he will only be glad of their classes. His parents come up to him and hug him tightly. Sometime later, the following events take place near the estate. The carriage is approaching the estate. A man notices a cart that has just arrived at their estate. He asks his son if he has forgotten anything, to which the guy replies that he has not. Mom only asks him to say hello to all the teachers when he arrives, but Kaio says he knows it anyway. Mom wants to say something else to him, but her husband stops her, saying that everything will be fine with him. The guy leaves the estate, asking his mother not to worry. Kyle is already 12 years old. He goes down the stairs, and Maluna is waiting for him at the bottom and says that time has passed quickly. He runs up to the girl because he is glad that she came to see him off, but the elf says that her only student is leaving for adulthood. She taught him everything she could, The rest depends only on his self-belief and diligence. But the main character only says that thanks to Maluna, he was able to understand magic much deeper, and then completely thanks her for her knowledge. Clay stands a little further away from them and quietly cries. And the guy, turning around at the noise, can't figure out if it's really a sound block. But then Maluna starts talking about the fact that she tells him this not as her student, but as a person with power. After all, there are many dark forces in their world that are hidden from ordinary people, and they are getting stronger and stronger, coming to the surface. She hopes he won't forget it. He just says he won't forget it. Then she pays attention to the bracelet and asks to take care of it. The boy says that he will do so, and that he will be careful with him. The man cleared his throat and said that the student and the teacher, of course, should say goodbye, but asks not to forget about them. His wife also joins the conversation and says that this is not fair. Maluna is just asking for forgiveness. Then he says it's time for Kyle to say goodbye to his parents. The boy approaches them and does not know what to say. He thinks to himself that they were happy to accept him, a child abandoned by his biological parents. He thinks for a long time about what to say. After all, they took care of him all the time, as if they were their own child. He has not yet done anything to repay their kindness. They are so happy to see him off to school. The boy says it's strange because he has a lot to say, but only words of gratitude come to his mind, and he begins to cry. His parents also broke down and cried, and he thanks them for raising him all these years. He is very grateful to them, and they all hug together. He remembers what they taught him and the love they gave him. He will never forget it, even though he will be on his own from now on. But now he is only going forward in his carriage to the State Academy. The State Academy of Magic is an academy located in the capital and run directly by the kingdom, the best place to study magic. After finishing his studies with Maluna, the main character went there. The history of this institution stretches like a silver thread through the entire history of the state. Many talented people, having studied at the academy, became soldiers and knights. Learning magic, an opportunity to show your talents, even a chance to make useful connections. But the most important thing is that you can find decent friends there. And now a new student has come to her door. His name was Kyle Flayfield. His crystal ball was black. He was the only person capable of controlling all magical attributes. While in the main hall of the academy, the girl in the hat greets all the newcomers. The teacher says it's time for them to start with a test, according to the results of which they will divide them into classes. There will be 3 tests in total: the total amount of magic power, the ability to control it, and its power. According to the results of this test, they will be divided into classes from A to F in the State Academy of Magic. The main thing is strength, and if they get into one of the upper classes, then life at the academy will be the best period of their lives. If it's in one of the lower ones, then the girl asks them to try their best on the tests. Now she will call them to her in order. All the guys start fussing and discussing everything among themselves. Kyle is wondering what the tests are going to be, and he can't wait for it. Approaching the table with the professors, he straightens his clothes and asks them for forgiveness. He also tells them that he is eager to gain knowledge. After that, the professor is asked to put his palm on the object next to him. He fulfills their request and asks if he did the right thing. The woman explains to him that this is a device that measures the magic reserve, and that the higher the score, the better it will be for him. Suddenly, explosions begin, and the object begins to break. The woman doesn't understand what's going on, but she can't figure out if the figure's eyes really lit up. The man also jumped up from his chair and asks what he did. Kyle just replies that there is absolutely nothing, and now his meter starts spinning. The numbers on it change quickly. The professors are watching him closely, and they can't believe he has so many points. More precisely, the counter showed 0, and they tell him that 0 points is the result, F. That's what Kyle's mana reserve score was. The professors announce to the other students that the measuring device is broken, so the test is postponed, but the boy really didn't do anything. Kyle followed him into the second test room. There are some objects flying around the perimeter quickly. An old man meets him and says that now it's time to test his magic control, and the points depend on how many times he hits the target with magic. After his explanations, he asks if the boy is ready. He says yes. And then he remembers Maluna's words about what she told him in class. She told him that even though the guy owns all the attributes, it's better to keep it a secret as long as he succeeds. until something completely out of the ordinary happens. She asks him to limit himself to the wind. He looked and counted only 200 small targets. He creates wind in his hands and thinks that this will be enough. 4 winds appear near it. This shocks the professor. He doesn't understand where so many magic balls came from. The main goal of the boy is to get the A rank, 200 points. He sends his balls forward and wants them to hit all the targets. He causes a huge explosion with his balls. The professor tried to hide from him. This terrifies the professor, after which the device starts beeping. The guy thinks he did it all right. He says that everything is ready. The old man asks if he has destroyed everything. After which Kyle happily runs up and asks how much he got. The device showed only 1 point. The old man says that the counter receives a signal when the blow hits the target. He thinks it's probably because all the targets were destroyed at the same time. Then the boy thinks that his score should be higher. But the professor apologizes to him and says that the most important thing is the number on the counter, and as a result, his score is F. The boy is already in the 3rd test room, and the professor is already meeting him, and he says that here they will test the power of his magic. After that, he tells me to attack this golem with my best spell. The attack power will be displayed on the display located on the golem's chest. The guy says he understands, but the man asks why Kyle is so sad. He slapped him hard enough on the back and asks him to cheer up. Then the boy asks him if he really just needs to attack the golem. The man thinks that even though Kyle is a little boy, he didn't even stagger after his clap. He wonders what kind of body he has. He looked at him suspiciously and thought about something. Then the boy asks if he can really beat this golem with all his might. The man was surprised and could not understand his question. But the boy explains to him that he is just afraid to break it inadvertently. The professor calms him down, saying that this golem should be tried to break. After all, he can even withstand his blow, and since Kyle is just a kid, he is sure that nothing would happen to him. Then the boy says he will check it out. Then he added that it was time to start, and after that the whole room was shrouded in wind. This greatly surprised the man. He noticed that this was a very strong compression of magical power, and Kyle only thinks to himself that he needs to get a good score for at least one exam, so as not to embarrass Maluna. He uses the Wind Fang spell. He opened his mouth in surprise. The professor can't figure out what kind of magic it is. The main character directs his hand forward to attack. He orders the fangs to bite. He also ordered them to tear up. As a result, he hits the golem and an explosion occurs. It was a powerful explosion that could be heard even outside the room. Someone reacted to this and turned around. Passers-by heard this and couldn't figure out if the ground was really shaking or if it was just their imagination. That girl standing by the window realized that it was in the 3rd test room. Meanwhile, in the room itself, the professor is sitting on the floor in complete shock. The golem was completely destroyed and only pieces of it remained. He also broke the magic meter. Because of this, his score is unknown. The man is surprised that Kyle really broke him, after which he asks not to worry about it and asks him to go to the main hall. The boy just lowered his head and was silent. The professor stared at him, which made the boy shudder and come to his senses. He said that he understood everything and thanked him, after which he bowed to him and said goodbye. Kyle went out, lost in his thoughts, and the professor looked down to look at him again. The man asks to be informed that the magic meter is broken. Then he hangs up. A girl comes up to him from behind and says she heard an explosion. This girl's name is Freya. She also says that she is very intrigued because the explosion was heard even in the staff room. With a grin, she would forgive him for telling her about this boy. He turned around and looked at her. He tells her that he looks like an ordinary boy, although he seems weak, but the opposite is true. But he can't tell for sure because the meter is broken. But he had never seen a golem that could be broken by magic alone. He does not know how many teachers have thought about it yet, because in fact, he is not so simple. But it would be easier to just call this boy a monster. Freya just smiles and hopes that Kyle will be in her class. Meanwhile, the announcement of the test results is taking place in the main hall of the academy. The boy looks at his results and it does not surprise him at all, because he has an F class. He thought that there was nothing terrible in this because knowledge can be obtained in any class, and he went ahead. Some time later, he left the main building and went to look for his dorm. He couldn't figure out where it was, but judging by his map, it had to be somewhere nearby. He examined everything carefully. After that, he came to the old and crumbling house altogether. It seemed as if it was uninhabitable. He carefully opened the front door and looked inside. He asked himself if he had come in the right way. Looking around carefully, he saw old and battered furniture. All the walls and desks were cracked and dirty. Continuing his inspection, he only remembered how in other classes that he had seen a little earlier, everything was completely different. Everything was clean and tidy. All the desks were intact and clean. The main character was passing between the desks, but suddenly decided to turn around at the sound. There I saw a very determined and depressed young lady. It was clear from her expression that she was very upset about everything that was happening to her at the moment. The boy began to watch her closely, and she, in turn, did not notice him and passed by. When she reached her desk and sat down at a chair, she just sighed heavily. Kyle couldn't stand it anymore and decided to ask the girl if she was really okay. The young lady, who had tears rolling out of her eyes, simply asked not to pay attention to her, and all because she is the daughter of an aristocrat. To her great regret, she has no talent at all in magic, and that is why she was assigned to the worst class. The main character did not fully understand what this means. There is no talent, and decided to clarify with her, but the girl still, without ceasing to cry, answered him that he understood everything correctly. Kyle finally realized exactly what she meant, and just as he was about to ask her something else, he was distracted by a sound coming from the door. A whole bunch of guys with drooping and sad faces came into the office. They sat down at their desks. One of them was crying. Some teenager covered his face with his hand from such shame. Someone was just starting to get very angry, and someone just grabbed his head and had no idea what to do next and how to be in such a situation. The main character watched everyone carefully and noticed that all the students were completely drooping, and he did not understand what the reason was. The girl sitting next to him at the desk and still continuing to shed tears told him that only aristocrats had any hope. Kyle decided to ask if this was true. The young lady answered him in the affirmative and continued to say that the main reason is that the children of rich families are taught magic from early childhood so that they can show themselves better at the academy, but they all manage to end up here anyway. If they continue like this, they won't even be able to look their families in the eye soon. Now the main character finally understood what was going on and what was the reason that the guys were so upset. The girl continues and says that it can be said that most of the students of the academy are children of noble or even royal blood. That is why a child who falls into the lower class affects the reputation of the family. But something does not fit in the head of the main character, because the girl herself recently told him that she had no talent at all. Although he feels that her stock of magical power is much greater than the rest of those present in this class. Then the guy wants to say something, still continuing to pour traces of the girl. He tells her that even though they are in Class F, he assumes that they can still get good teachers, so they will need to try hard. After which, he asks if her talent is completely hidden. Upon hearing these words, the girl stops crying and turns her head towards him, and Kyle just smiles at her happily and says that she finally looked at him. He says his name is Kyle Flayfield and he hopes they can become friends. This shocks the girl and makes her very confused and nervous, which is why she jumps up from her chair and loudly declares to the entire audience that her name is Kitty Frederick, while the girl began to stutter from embarrassment. However, she really can't figure something out. Namely, for what reason did this man reappear in front of her? She searched for him all over the capital, but nothing came of it, even though she remembered his soft and silver hair perfectly and very well, and also his golden eyes, which shine with a soft light, as if they can see through everything. After all, she is now definitely convinced of her assumption that she saw him 7 years ago, and it was this man who saved her and her soldiers from goblins and other monsters, so she owes him her life. After she remembers everything, she turns abruptly to the main character and asks if he remembers her, because they once saw each other in the forest when they were little, very children. Other children also looked at them. Suddenly, a woman with disheveled hair walks into the classroom and does not let Kitty finish talking. A woman who has just entered the classroom tells everyone in the class to be silent. Absolutely everyone falls silent, or, to be more precise, a grimace of horror freezes on their faces, and they cannot believe that this is their teacher. Kitty is also in shock, and the main character was only slightly surprised by this outcome of events. He did not really show any emotions. After some thought, he looked at her with a smile and said that it was just fine. The woman stomped her foot loudly and said that everyone in the room at the moment was just weak in spirit and that was why they ended up in Class F. The woman clarified whether everything was clear to them, but she hoped so, and then she said that she was their class teacher and her name was Freya Arifana. Her attributes were fire and wind. The main character looks at her with full enthusiasm and hope in his eyes. Freya notices his gaze. She is interested in who is not afraid of her, Scream, and began to scroll through her magazine. She realized who it was. He was the boy who destroyed the golem. Kyle thinks to himself that it's amazing that she amplified her voice with magic, although he didn't expect anything less from the teachers. After that, Freya decides to ask her class why they are all so sad, although all F classes in her practice are the same. If they don't like something, then let them talk. She asks the guys if they don't like this shabby building, or they are completely worried that the definition of the lowest class will affect their families. However, she reminds them that absolutely nothing can be done anymore and that they will just have to put up with it, and all because elite magicians are trained at this academy. Everyone in the class, in her opinion, is just the dregs of the magical world. This makes Kitty cry even more. The main character notices changes in her behavior. It makes him think. While everyone continues to sob, Freya continues her speech. She says that they should still try and make the most of their efforts, but she also asks them not to forget something, namely, that no matter how hard they try, the lower class will remain the lower class, and there is nothing to be done about it. After which he asks everyone if they understood this. Kyle thought deeply. After that, he gets up from his seat and raises his hand up, while the evil Miss Freya asks him to let her say something. Kitty turns her head to look at him, and tears continue to flow from her eyes. The teacher recognized him, so she was wary. She clarified what he wanted to ask, and then asked him not to be shy and ask his question. He only stated that he fully agreed with her and that talented students should receive more than others. The girl sitting next to him freezes. The other students also turned to look at him in complete disbelief. This is a little annoying for Freya, but she agrees with him. But Kyle didn't stop there and said he still had a question. The other kids couldn't figure out what was wrong with him and thought the guy was just sucking up. He asks if they can prove that they are better. Then the academy will change its attitude towards them. This question shocks everyone. Freya irritably asks if he really wasn't listening to what she was saying. No matter how hard they try, the higher classes will be better because they will also become stronger, so they will never catch up with them. Kyle clarifies if this is true, to which Freya says yes. After all, hundreds of students have had such a hopeless dream so far. Exhausting workouts didn't lead to anything because they couldn't be compared to the students better than them. In short, talent is the deciding factor. All her past students had previously asked her for forgiveness for the fact that they would always be losers. So she asks them to stop dreaming. Kyle says that maybe so, but she said something before that. Namely, that only so far this has never happened, and clarifies whether the guy understood her correctly. This terrifies all the students and Freya. Then Kyle declares that, for that matter, they will become the first F class, which will destroy this axiom of talent. The guy is serious about this. This causes Freya to be shocked. After all, she remembers telling her last class that she would definitely teach them everything and ask them not to give up. But this only makes the teacher smile. She laughed out loud and said that Kyle was being very defiant in front of her and calling him an impudent man. And yet it will be very interesting if such a miracle happens, then she will argue with the administration, even if she has to risk her life. This horrified Kitty. The main character was very happy to hear this news. After that, Freya only said that she would wait for their help. The inspired protagonist goes and slowly inspects the gorgeous hostel. He only thinks to himself that this is exactly the hostel in which he will live for the next 3 years. He notices that this is a very good building. Opening the large and heavy wooden doors, the boy's eyes began to shine even brighter from what he saw. After all, the whole room was decorated with gold, and all the furniture in it was very neat and literally glittered. His attention is drawn to a bunch of people who are huddled together and looking at something very intently. A crying boy is sitting on the floor, and everyone crowded around him, especially one who looked at him with a malicious smile. Although Kyle did not interfere, he continued to listen carefully and seriously to what they were saying and to monitor their actions. The boy who was sitting on the floor got to his feet. He asked the boy standing in front of him why he had hit him, because he was just sitting quietly while. He said it all and cried. The boy's name is Delia, and he's in Class 1F, and his element is Earth. He decided to explain to him and said that the whole point was that the boy with abrasions on his face was in Class 1F, and that his presence, in principle, spoils the air. This boy's name is Turk, and he studies in Class 1A, and his element is fire. Delia, trying to wipe away the tears running down his face, only says that even for Class A, this is already too much, and he went too far in his moralizing. The Turk still laughs maliciously and says that if the guy still has at least some strength to be indignant, then this means only one thing, that he did not get enough. Saying these words, he clenches his fists, making it clear that he already wants to strike him. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the main character appears in front of Delia himself. He asks him with great interest and pleasure if the boy with abrasions on his face is really from the same class as him. The boy continued the conversation, turning to Delia and said that his name was Kyle and that he was glad to meet him. The boy with abrasions on his face also told him his name and also greeted his new acquaintance. After that, Delia, still crying, realized that he had already seen Kyle when he was asking questions to their homeroom teacher. But the Turk did not listen to their touching speeches. As soon as he heard that the main character was also from a lower class, he instantly pointed his fist towards him and mockingly clarified whether he was also from Class F, and then declared that there was enough of him for everyone. As soon as Kyle noticed how hostile the Turk was against him, he became very serious. With the help of magic, he dodged his blow, thereby forcing the boy to end up on the floor. Turk, in turn, did not understand at all how he ended up on the floor, but the main character only said that at this rate it would be possible to injure someone, but the boy who was lying on the floor turned to Kyle. As soon as he got to his feet, his comrades standing in the crowd asked the Turk what he was doing. They tell him not to let lower-class students humiliate him like that. Turk instantly replied that he knew all about it perfectly well. The main character, after hearing their conversation, asked the boy if his name was really Turk, but the young man himself was terrified by Kyle's manner of speech. The main character asked the young man for what purpose he hit Delia. This shocked the Turk, and he did not know at all what to answer him. Kyle still menacingly asked him if he really wasn't going to answer his question. Turk couldn't tell him anything intelligible, but the guys from the crowd kept shouting for the boy to punch Kyle, and they didn't understand why he was just standing there. Suddenly, someone touched his shoulder, which shocked the Turk, because he did not expect this at all. The man who put his hand on his shoulder only said that everything was fine. As soon as the Turk turned around, he saw Mr. Sykes behind his back and exclaimed in surprise. This guy also studies in Class 1A, and his element is fire, and his name is Sykes Old Delight. Delia could not believe if this was really the son of the Old Delight family, and the shock did not leave his face. The main character noticed the captured face of his new acquaintance and decided to ask if he knew him. After which, Delia replied to him that Old Delight is a great family that raises only the most talented swordsmen, magicians, and it was rumored that a genius from their family would enter the academy this year. That's when Kyle realized it was Sykes Old Delight. He is that genius from a great family. Sykes, in turn, said that Class F can safely use the recreation room. The Turk ran into trouble for himself, and he, in turn, exclaimed in surprise. But then, suddenly, Sykes became serious and began his speech. He said that someone in this room was using magic. He asks if he will tell them who it was. Everyone present was shocked because they did not expect this at all, and they did not understand what other magic, whether anyone could even notice it. Sykes continued, and pointing his finger at the main character said that he pushed him with the wind and threatened him with words that had magical power embedded in them. Then he clarified whether he was right. After hearing this, the crowd began to call him not the nicest person from the F class at all. Kyle, in turn, just smiled broadly and asked if he really noticed it, because the main character thought he hit it well. Turk got mad and went up to Kyle and said that it was a very dirty act towards him to use magic unnoticed. But Sykes asked him to stop it. He told him that he should think about it, since he couldn't see it all himself. It shocks the Turk. Sykes returns to the main character. He says that it's still hard to believe that someone could deceive the elite from Class A, even though he is in Class F. He begins to wonder who Kyle really is, and what kind of person he is. Suddenly, a voice appears asking the boys to calm down immediately and stop everything. The voice belonged to the dormitory manager. She has the element of water, and her name is Glacia. While the girl was running towards them, she simultaneously asked what was going on there. Finally, approaching them, the main character calmed her down, saying that nothing was happening here. After all, they just insulted his friend. And he was just upset, that's all, nothing special. The only thing he wants is for the Turk to apologize to Delia, but the Turk himself does not agree with this and adds that it is up to him to apologize. Glacia asks everyone to calm down and says that she will listen to them later, but for now she asks them all to return to their rooms and not worry about anything. But then Freya suddenly appears and hugs her shoulder. She says that's not how things are done. Then she wonders how their newcomers can still throw out their energy. After that, she asks how they can calm down emotions after a conflict at such an age. Kitty notices Kyle and Freya. A man's voice is heard from behind, which answers all Freya's questions in the negative. This voice belongs to Raygoat, the class teacher of Class 1A. His element is fire and wind. He says that if you just ignore it, the conflict will flare up even more in the future. Glacia tries to stop him. But Freya says that the man is right, and there is only one way left. She offered them a duel between them. Kyle just says it sounds interesting. Sykes can't believe it. But the Turk laughingly tells the main character that he cannot win, but he does not believe him. Turk continues and says he'd better run. After all, if he loses, he will have to drop out of the academy because he still believes that people like Kyle are unworthy to go to the academy. Kitty says it's too much. Kyle agrees to this fight. He talks about what will happen if he wins. He points his finger at Sykes. His condition was for Sykes to transfer to Class F. It shocks the guy. The teachers were also shocked. So did the guys who were watching all this. Turk, completely angry, asked if Kyle didn't want him to apologize, but the main character doesn't understand what he's talking about. After all, it is logical that he will need to apologize to Delia. He will have to apologize anyway, even if Sykes wins, it just infuriates the Turk. But he's scared that Sykes comes out to Kyle and asks if it's a bet. Then he clarifies, either Kyle is expelled, or Sykes is transferred to Class F. The main character confirms his words with a smile on his face. After that, Sykes becomes very menacing and warns the guy not to even try not to follow his word. After that, he clarifies whether he understood him and wonders if the main character really thinks he can do it. Defeating him won't be easy, according to Sykes. Everyone was terrified of the menacing aura surrounding Sykes. Kyle just laughed softly and said that he was confident in his abilities. It shocked the guy. Everyone present did not expect this either. After which, Sykes said that everything was fine, and also that he agreed to this bet. The surrounding people became nervous. Freya bursts in, who says that everything has been decided and that everyone who wants to watch should go to the hall. After all, there will be a duel between classes A and F, while the students of Class F are standing and worrying about Kyle. Meanwhile, the students of Class A are just grinning contentedly and looking forward to this duel. Freya can't wait for the fight to start, and Glacia is worried. Raygot shows no emotion. They all went to the gym, and ahead of everyone are the main guests of the program, that is, Kyle and Sykes. When they reach the training arena, the main character begins to inspect it with delight. Walking around the columns, he can't believe if the fight will really be held in this place, and he wonders if it's too small an arena. But as soon as he walked a little further, a whole stadium opened up in front of him. Rygo goes up to the boy and asks if he was surprised, because this arena was created by Ralm Espazio. He was one of the founders of the academy, and was the last one who could use the magic of space. Ryagot tells the guy that everything is protected here, and when the fight starts, the barriers will not allow the audience to be hurt. And even if you break down the barriers, they will immediately recover, and this is just the perfect arena. Kyle is thrilled after describing this arena. After that, he clarifies whether they can really use magic and not hold back, to which the smug Raygot replies to him that of course, and asks him to give his best. Then Freya calls him over to her. He asks her what's the matter. The woman thinks to herself that Kyle is probably going to use the same magic as in the test. She wonders what will happen to the arena if he gives his all. And yet, she thinks it will be fun, and with a smile on her face, asks the guy not to get hurt during the battle. To which Kyle says, it's fine. Glacia waves her hand and asks the main character and Sykes to enter the arena. And now they are standing in front of each other. Then the girl asks the participants if they will prepare their sticks. Sykes instantly took out a sword from his inside jacket pocket. Those present couldn't figure out if it was really a wand or if the guy was really using a sword as a catalyst. Regoth only exclaims in surprise, but thinks to himself that this is a magic sword with a spirit of fire inside. And, of course, he knows that there are people who use weapons as catalysts. He holds a sword with the spirit of fire in his hands because the family entrusted it to him, showing that they expect a lot from him. Then he turned his attention to Kyle's wand. She looked very funny and flimsy compared to Sykes. This made the Turk laugh a lot, because he could not understand what the kid was holding in his hands. The others only say that they did not expect anything less from the lower class. All the viewers say that these can't even be called a battle. Sykes can't figure out what's going on. After all, the quality of the wand is very important in magic duels, because a good wand enhances the power of spells, and Kyle has a simple wooden wand. It seemed to him that the guy would have at least something, but he expected too much. Glacius says she will explain the rules of the duel. This arena is only for training, so when they leave the arena, all their injuries will be repaired. If they receive life-threatening damage, the duel will end automatically, so they can fight at full strength. Delia can't understand why she talks about it so casually. Glacia recalls that the special condition of the duel is that if Sykes loses, he is transferred to Class F, and if Kyle loses, he leaves the academy. Victory is determined when one of them admits defeat or will not be able to continue the fight. She also says that the judge can intervene and end the fight. She explained all the rules to them and asks if they still have questions. The brunette was more focused. The corners of his lips were turned down. The narrower eyes seemed to be peering at the enemy. His pupils resembled those of a cat. Her dark hair fell over her eyes and was very long. The air was thickening around the boys. The blond man's eyes were as big as a fawn's. The eyelashes were as white as the youth's hair. He had a shorter haircut, and his hair only touched his thick eyelashes a little. The girl standing not far from them was a little tense. She had long hair and a light fringe falling over her forehead. Her eyes were hidden behind round-rimmed glasses. Drop earrings dangled from her ears. She gave her permission to those standing nearby. Since permission has been granted, then a magic duel with the permission of the academy between Sykes and Kyle will be held immediately. The students of the academy who were watching this reacted in different ways. Someone was watching very intently what was happening. The children in the back rows were crying. Some were confused, and some looked at it all with a smile of satisfaction. A woman's hand flew up in the air, preparing to signal the beginning of the duel to the combatants. They were told to get ready. As soon as they were given the signal to start the fight, some of the watching children raised their hands in the air for support. The brunette, having drawn his sword, was still in no hurry to raise it towards his opponent, while the blonde pulled out his wand in preparation for battle. Older boys, raising their hands in the air, shouted with all their might to Mr. Sykes, urging him to move forward. They called his opponent trash and wanted him to get what he deserved. The little boy, who was crying even before the start of the fight, clutched his hair with his hands. He was clearly overcome by panic. He believed that everything that was happening was because of him. Tears flowed like a river from his still childishly round eyes. A girl standing next to a sobbing child put her palms together in a prayer gesture. Her hair was moving in the wind. The eyes were wide open and watched everything with awe. Right now, all she can think about is Kyle. The brunette in uniform finally raised his sword in front of him and stood in a stance. His weapon was instantly engulfed in flames, which, surprisingly, did not cause any harm to the guy himself and did not move further onto his clothes. The young man was angry and determined to win. He was sure that the duel would end in an instant. His mouth was disfigured by an evil grin. The blond man, seeing the flame, lowered his wand down in admiration. There was a childish curiosity in his eyes, as if he wasn't aware of the situation. He was only interested in his opponent's cool sword. He asked him if he was magical. The brunette, seeing the irresponsibility of his opponent, furiously asked if he was going to continue standing as if he was not in a duel right now. Despite the fact that the opponent is not defending himself, the brunette was already waving his sword in preparation to attack. From a distance, he swung the sword horizontally, not intending to defeat the opponent with the blade, and released from it many magical fire spheres that flew towards the other. The audience clenched their fists in admiration and could not resist surprised comments when they saw a large number of fireballs. Absolutely all the magical fire spheres flew clearly at the target and everyone saw it. But the blond man continues to stand still, not moving and not doing anything. Only when the spheres were very close did he raise his wand and bring it to his face. He directed it towards the enemy, and at that moment, all the spheres that were heading towards the boy changed their trajectory and hit the ground, pulling away from him. The brunette looked at it in shock, rounding his feline eyes in surprise. Those watching couldn't believe their eyes. They talked about the fact that absolutely all the attacks flew by peacefully. But that's not possible. Mr. Sykes could not have made such a mistake. The brunette was swearing. The man with glasses and a long braid who was watching this thought about it. He was aware that Sykes had not missed. It's all Kyle. He redirected all the fire spheres along a different trajectory with the help of the wind, and he did it all very quickly, so others might not notice it. The guy with the piercing was wondering, why, with such skills and magic, did Kyle stay in F, and he did it all without straining too much. He still had a calm smile on his face. Sykes realized that he had missed, but he realized that it was because of the wind magic that the blonde man used on the Turk. His face was a mixture of anger and surprise. Kyle, standing relaxed in front of him, said that it was quite curious. But is this really all that Sykes can show? The last phrase exasperated the brunette, and he shouted at his opponent, asking again. Kyle added, smiling, that he wanted to see the strength of the guy himself, not the strength of the sword he was trying to attack him with. For Sykes, these words were like a heavy blow. His whole face expressed confusion and shock. But as soon as he came to his senses, he clenched his teeth in a grin. But he decided not to act on the advice of the advisor and did not throw his sword aside. On the contrary, he prepared a stronger blow. It was like a fiery whirlpool in the sky. He was sure that this attack would be difficult to dodge. Kyle's words made him so angry that veins popped out on his forehead. But the hero, without panicking, calmly waved his wand vertically towards the oncoming whirlpool. It was as if Sykes, with all his anger and despair, furiously shouted that his spell was more powerful. At one point, a huge flash of light appeared in front of him, which caused him to lock himself in place. Turning his head in her direction, he rolled his eyes, realizing what it was. With the help of his magic, Kyle expanded this fire hurricane, hiding himself and his opponent from the eyes of others. They were just the two of them in the midst of a firestorm. The people on the other side did not understand what it was. Everything was filled with a storm that swallowed up the fire. The girl with glasses who gave her consent to the fights, holding her head, tried to run away from this place. Inside the storm, Sykes excitedly asked what Kyle was going to do now that he had done such a thing. But the idea was simple. He just didn't want them to be seen by extra eyes. For example, the girl who had been looking at them with an interested smile since the beginning of the fight. Sykes showed Kyle advanced magic, so he needs to respond in kind, doesn't he? As he spoke, he extended his wand-free right hand to the side and, lowering his palm down, began to conjure. To fight fire magic, it is best to use water magic. It is clear to everyone. This is the best option of all that there is. Sykes, who was listening to his reasoning, looked at him questioningly. As if trying to offend him with this fact, Sykes replied that he only owns air magic, so what's the point of him talking about it? Kyle continued to stand in place, conjuring with his free hand. He finally raised his eyes looking directly at the opponent and said with a slight smile that he just thought it was boring and he had a better option. At that moment, it was as if there was a small explosion in his hand, and flames appeared from there. A shocked brunette with dilated eyes watched what was happening. The blonde man decided to use fire magic, just like Sykes. He asked him if he minded, but the enemy's response clearly would not have affected anything. He stood with his outstretched hand, which was all ablaze with fire, and still looked with a smile, but his gaze no longer expressed friendliness and calmness. The dark-haired man's hair swayed from the power of someone else's magic. Not believing what was happening, Sykes asked if he was really using fire magic. Can this guy really use two elements? But is this possible? Kyle decided to make sure that it wasn't Sykes' chapel yet and asked him about it. The brunette stood in a stance and was already ready to defend himself, but when he heard the question, he flinched. The blonde wanted him to show him everything he was capable of. No one will see them now, and no one will stop them. Kyle's eyes were getting crazier. Those standing outside the storm just looked at this windy bathing area without doing anything. A girl with long hair and glasses watched this with fright. They can't see what's going on inside. It's dangerous. She asked the others a question. Should they stop the fight? The man with glasses and piercings standing behind her silently watched the situation. Another replied that there are no problems right now. After all, Kyle created this dome on purpose, but others were not satisfied with Freya's answer. She realized that the guy didn't want them to see anything. The man with glasses didn't understand exactly what Kyle didn't want. He crossed his arms over his chest, waiting for an explanation. But she doesn't know herself. Her hunch is that he's going to use something really powerful. So young Sykes was clearly unlucky to be trapped inside. Sykes understood that his opponent was clearly abnormal. He can't hide his true strength. If it uses an attack, then it can work. He was trying to focus on Kyle, but he was clearly off balance. He raised his sword up with both hands and surrounded himself with a full flame. He shouted at the top of his voice, his spell for the great spirit living in the sword, asking it to absorb his magical power. In the name of his family, he must win. The flames from his hand began to rise up through the blade of his sword, forming the shape of a small fire dragon with a body similar to a snake. The fire beast even had fangs. The fire kept expanding and getting bigger and more powerful, soaring up into the air and raising a pile of dust around them. Because of this, Kyle had to put one of his hands forward, covering his own face. He stood wide-eyed in the midst of a huge amount of dust and did not take his gaze full of surprise from his opponent. The brunette, leaning on his hind leg, tried to survive to the maximum of his strength. He chose the burning savior spell. The fire on his sword acquired a rounded blade-like shape towards the end. His cloak fluttered in the wind. He threatened Kyle that there might not be any dust left. He was obviously very angry about this situation. In general, that's to be expected. If that's the case, then Kyle shouldn't stand still either. He extended his hand forward again, preparing the spell in his palm. He's going to show Sykes something very amazing. He raised his palm up, and instantly a huge pillar of fire surrounded his entire body and soared upwards with tremendous power. The example froze in place, watching as the color of Kyle's fire changed. The blond man himself was smiling at that moment. His eyes were not visible from under his hair that was swaying in the wind. He used blue flame spells. His fire took the form of a monster with many sharp fangs and burning evil eyes. A lot of sparks took the shape of wool and also moved from the flow of a small wind. The brunette stood motionless in place, watching it right in front of him. That's Kyle's flame. A flame that has even more heat than the red one. The blue flame. It towered like a huge shadow behind the blond man, raising its muzzle to the sky. Sykes tried to concentrate. Now is not the time to be surprised by everything. He twisted his face in indignation, clenching his teeth. Even so, as the heir of the family, he cannot lose. He screamed at the top of his voice while an indifferent Kyle watched this. He approached the blond man, raising his sword up, wanting to hit the guy with his flame. His eyes were white with anger. The blond man did not wait for him to be hit, raised his hand with flames up, summoning the blue flame wolf. He ordered his monster to consume his opponent's flames. At that moment, many fangs appeared right in front of Sykes and headed straight towards him, wanting to absorb his power. All he could do was watch with wide eyes as something like this approached him. The dark-haired man's sword flew up, turning around on its axis. All the fire that covered the weapon disappeared. People outside noticed that the air dome began to weaken, and holes appeared in it. The girl who stood with the crying child pressed her palms to her chest, waiting for what they would see. Freya and the girl with glasses both opened their mouths in surprise. Sykes' sword was sticking out of the tile, which had cracked from the blade as he fell. When the dome completely dissipated, the observer saw Sykes' sword stuck in the tile. The guy himself, kneeling on one knee, was sitting next to him. On the contrary, Kyle stood calmly on two legs. His expression could not be seen from under his thick bangs. One of Mr. Sykes' friends called him out of surprise. He was conscious. He was looking at his opponent and bared his teeth. His strongest spell didn't work. This is a failure. His spell was absorbed by Kyle's frightening magical power. The blond man himself was still full of energy. He was smiling as he held up his wand. He urged the brunette to stand up and asked what else he could show him. Sykes fell into a stupor. It was as if he had been doused with cold water, sobering him. How, even after such a powerful spell, he can still continue the fight, and he behaves as if he did not participate in the battle at all. This made the brunette very angry, but he still said honestly that he would not show anything else. After these words, Kyle stopped and looked at him in surprise. He lowered his head to the ground, hiding his eyes and clutching his own knee with his palm. Still on his knees, the brunette realized that he had lost. His sword was all cracked and already in improper condition. They continued to stay in their places without saying anything. The audience from Sykes and Kyle who heard this was amazed at what was happening. The girl with long hair and glasses who allowed this fight to the students decided to announce the results as soon as possible while everyone is in shock and silent. She held out her hand and announced the winner of this match, Kyle Flavor. The crying children blushed with happiness as they watched their friend win this battle. The man in glasses with a scythe was muttering something and not bothering to finish the sentence properly. It was only clear that it had something to do with Sykes. Freya turned away, thinking that it was unnecessary to break the sword. The sword was already lying on the ground, showing 2 smooth scratches with a cross in the middle of its blade. The brunette watched this with sadness. Picking up his weapon, he returned it to its scabbard with a characteristic clicking sound. He realized that he was still too weak and asked for forgiveness, although it was not clear to himself. Feeling some kind of movement in front of him, he raised his head and saw a hand that was extended to him for help by the blond man. Eiler. Kyle stood with his hand outstretched and smiled as he greeted Dykes in Class F. He praised this fight, calling it great, and suggested that the brunette become stronger together. He was beaming, and his cheeks were flushed. With his eyes wide open from such friendliness, the brunette at the beginning only stared at him in silence. He reflected on his words to become stronger. Finally getting up from the ground on his own, ignoring the outstretched hand for help, he replied that he had not thought that he would hear it one day. He himself held out his hand, saying that studying with a strong guy like him could even be very useful. Finally, his mouth showed a slight smile instead of a grin. He hopes he can learn a lot from Kyle. They finally shook hands, closing their eyes and smiling slightly. Kyle replied that it was mutual for him. The people around rejoiced at this ending of the duel. Those who supported Sykes looked at it with some confusion and anger. One of these 3 ran away, thinking about how he lost so easily and now can shake hands with this man they hate. This guy has a real talent. Many people understood that. The children immediately ran up to him admiringly, with the remnants of tears on their cheeks. The teachers continued to communicate with each other. The elf wondered what would become Class F when Sykes transferred. But Freya couldn't exactly know the answer to this question. She didn't know it herself. She smiled a little villainously, saying that she would definitely be very interested in the next lesson. The elf asked Freya, a little confused, what she was up to. She just laughed, saying that it was nothing, and she was just looking forward to it. Their voices drifted further away. A school tower with beautiful architecture was visible in the background. There was a huge mountain cliff, far away from the battlefield. Someone in a long robe and black shoes was standing on the edge of it, watching what was happening from below. His face was covered by a hood, and he asked as if into the void if they could hear the approaching rock. The air around him would thicken and turn black. He looked at the heroes, saying that they were given this world, and they did not even realize that they were in someone else's power. Continuing to look around this time, his gaze settled on the brunette with his friends. How this man waits for them to hear their screams, and they will scream just for him, this realization caused him to smile furiously with pleasure. He wants to crush every student and leave none alive. With his arm outstretched as if trying to strike, he continued to stand on the cliff in anticipation of his thoughts, only thinking about the future. At this time, the students of the academy continued to celebrate the match that had just taken place, which ended in victory in favor of Kyle Flavor. There was an academy building with lots of greenery on the walls. The building itself was made of wood in dark and light tones. Through one of the windows, Freya could be seen giving a lecture to the students. She was writing something on the blackboard, holding a chalk in her right hand and a book with educational materials in her left, and explaining something to the students in parallel. Some students looked at the upper rows. Their emotions were different, but mostly their expressions showed discontent and a little fear. It turned out that the reason for this was that Kyle and Sykes were sitting in the 2 back desks. Their tables were separated by a small aisle between the rows, so they were roommates. They paid absolutely no attention to each other. Kyle, as always, sat with a slight smile and looked ahead at the teacher. The girl sitting next to him, who was at the tournament, looked askance at the sight of the phoenix. The brunette was looking ahead at the teacher with his arms crossed over his chest. Today, Class 1F has a practical lesson. Freya took all the students outside, putting them in one row in front of some metal structures. Today is their first practical lesson. She wants to start it by shooting at a single target. The very first one decided to try was a child who cried at a duel between 2 guys, thinking that this duel took place because of him. He pulled his wand forward and shouted, and saw that only a small stone came out of it. But unfortunately, all the stones that he was able to create did not fly a greater distance and fell almost near him. No matter how hard he tried to hit the target, they flew off in completely different directions, but not along the trajectory that he needed. The boy was crying. He began to think about how pathetic he was. Even with such a simple task, he still can't cope, and it depresses him. One of the students behind him also tried to reach the target, but he also failed. Suddenly, some loud sounds were heard from the side, and everyone was startled, looking in the direction from where they were coming. It turned out that these sounds were from a blonde man with a brunette. They stood next to each other again and let out magic with the strongest blows without even straining. Their faces were calm, as if this task was not worth any effort for them. All their punches hit exactly the target they were assigned. The air and fire hit exactly in the middle of a single target. The guys watching this talked to each other about how cool they both were. It's not surprising because Sykes is from Class A. But what was most surprising was that Kyle was not far behind him. It could be said that they had the same impact power. One of the guys heard that the fight between them was still a sight. And to be honest, they are on a completely different level. Kyle at that moment managed to advise Sykes to concentrate on power, and he followed his words. One of the students was very scared that they would never reach their level. The guy who had been crying recently had already wiped his tears and looked at what was happening in surprise. Next to him, a girl who recently sat at the same desk with a blonde man tried to create a water balloon, but it was very small and soon burst altogether, never budging. Sykes stared ahead intently, aiming his fire precisely at the target. He liked the result. He thought it was very good. He watched what the blonde man was doing out of the corner of his eye. As expected, his sensitivity to magic is at the highest level, and the power and accuracy are higher than any of the A-class. After several blows, the blonde man completely demolished part of the single target. The rounded structure on the pillar broke off. Kyle, clutching his wand, looked awkwardly ahead. He realized that he seemed to have overdone it a little. If Sykes continues to study with him, he thinks he can surpass him. That was his goal. He continued to stare, without taking his eyes off, and called out by name, telling him that further practice in long-range magic was underway. But he never received an answer because the blonde man was also called loudly by clicking on him. Again, the child ran up to him with tears, saying that he was not good at using magic. He asked Kyle to give him some advice because he's already desperate. He greeted Delia and suggested that he try to do it together. He gradually explained to the child that there are several stages in using a spell. But the brunette was no longer listening to their conversations. He was clearly confused or disappointed that he was interrupted and did not finish. The child that ran up to them had already pulled out a wand, trying to do what Kyle explained to him. He asked him if he had done the right thing and if his magic was flying in a straight line. He smiled at this and clapped his hands, saying that it was a great job. But he still made a slight remark that next time he should aim at the center of the target. All the other students watched with wide eyes. Gradually, everyone began to come closer to him, asking for help. Many disciples crowded around him, wanting to ask for help. Kyle said that he would help absolutely everyone cope with this task. Freya, standing on the sidelines, called the guys, saying that this was actually her role. And it's true that she was a teacher, but for some reason everyone turned to Kyle for help, not to her. At this moment, the ignored brunette was already climbing the stairs, leaving the training ground. Freya noticed this and called out to him, asking where he was going in the middle of the lesson. He turned around and told her that it was a lesson for beginners. Everyone in his last Class A already knew how to do such basic things. He decided that there was no reason for him to be here, since he already knows how to do all this. He also has no intention of watching people who don't know how to do anything learn the basics a little bit. His words were heard by the blonde's roommate, and she shuddered after these statements. Apparently, she took them personally. Freya asked a little bit angrily if he would really leave so brazenly right in front of her. After all, she was his teacher. The guy turned his head away from the teacher again, intending to continue on his way. He doesn't have time to play saint, so he decided that he would train alone. He meant Kyle that at that moment he was surrounded by students who were asking for help. Freya just scratched her head at this, deciding not to say anything more to Sykes and let him go about his business. The blonde kept talking to the other students, apparently explaining what they should do first for this assignment. The girl continued to watch the departing brunette, clenching her palms. She was clinging to her soul too much by the words he said. After them, she concluded that if this continued, she would be of no use. Apparently, she was very afraid of becoming useless to others. After class, an internal training ground. It was a garden with many goals set on the ground and in the air. Aerial targets were attached to a glass dome. Inside, someone was trying to summon water balloons. The girl was already out of breath. and sweat was running down her face. She put her hand to her chest to steady her breathing. She recalled that Kyle had then told others that the magic shot could be divided into 3 main stages. The first stage is formation. The second stage is the investment of the necessary magical power for the desired power. The third is the control of the magic shot. If one of these stages does not go according to plan, the spell will fail. If the formation of magic is not going smoothly, then they should read the spell out loud to make it easier. In that case, if they put in enough magic power, then they should be able to do it. When they release the spell, it will be connected to them by an invisible thread of magical power. They just need to focus on transferring magical power to control this thread. If they don't forget about it, then any spell will work. It was like he was giving a lecture to students. All the guys, hearing his explanation, clapped their hands thanking him for his help, and the girl behind him just silently watched him. Now she was on the training ground trying to imagine a water ball and put magic power into it. To concentrate, she closed her eyes and tried to visualize it. She tried to summon a water ball. A small water sphere appeared in front of her and she was very happy, thinking that this time she would definitely succeed. But right in front of her eyes, the balloon burst, spraying water in different directions. Splashes from a burst water balloon hit the girl on her head and clothes, soaking her. Why does everyone succeed and only one she can't handle? Something like this even after explaining. This realization caused only tears of helplessness and misunderstanding of the situation. The girl continued to stand in place, shedding tears. At one point, she turned her head and saw that she had had one viewer all this time. Kyle, leaning on one leg as if in a jump, stated the fact that she did not do well. But he didn't look like he wanted to make fun of her. The girl was very surprised when she saw him. The tears were pouring down harder than before. She screamed in panic how long he had been here. The guy, without answering the question, said that he wanted to practice in this place, so he came. He put his bag on one of the benches and opened it. He took a towel out of it and handed it to the girl to smile so that she could dry herself. He said that before they could continue the conversation, she needed to take it first, because she was all soaked after the water balloon burst right in front of her. The girl continued to cry, pressing the towel he had given her to her face. She was thanking him. Her face was flushed with embarrassment. Right now, even all her thoughts were about him. The guy reached into his bag again and took out the usual donuts. He put one in his mouth, holding it with his teeth, and handed the other to the girl, asking if she wanted it. She was still wiping her cheeks with a towel and was surprised by this. What surprised her the most was how much he had in his bag. The guy stammered that he was, but in fact his bag was shady. Apparently it was a secret to others, so he didn't tell her that. Surprisingly, the next thing he took out was a tea set. Continuing to hold his donut in his teeth and handing it to the second girl, he held the kettle with one hand and the saucer with the cup with the other. In his opinion, donuts are even tastier with black tea. The girl did not understand at all how the warm black tea ended up in his bag. But apparently she decided not to ask any more questions and silently drank a hot drink, relaxing. They both sat down on a bench. The girl closed her eyes and finally relaxed from what delicious tea she had drunk. Smiling, the guy said that it was a very popular black tea imported by his father's company. For a second, the girl froze and put the cup on the saucer. She tilted her head so that her eyes could not be seen from under the bangs falling on her forehead. The guy noticed this and looked at her, but was silent, waiting for her to say something first. The girl admitted that she did everything as he said, but she considers herself absolutely hopeless. It's true that she has absolutely no talent. Apparently, she will have to put up with it. The guy didn't think it was true. The girl thought that he felt sorry for her and turned away from embarrassment and chagrin, as if she was going to cry again. She closed her eyes and tried to say something else, unflattering to herself. But the guy immediately took off, denying everything he said to her. It was so abrupt that the girl turned back to him in surprise. He stood right in front of her and, clenching his fists with a serious face, said that he did not feel sorry for her. He really thinks she has talent. He asked if she wanted to try again, because he wanted to try again. For the first time, there was no longer even a slight smile on his face. He was completely serious. The girl lost her speech from surprise, but quickly agreed. The guy told her to calm down first and try again after that. She agreed again. But still, she really didn't want to appear so helpless and useless in front of him. And this situation was extremely embarrassing for her because they were alone with him now. And the realization of this made her blush even more. And now, not only her cheeks were scarlet, but even her forehead. She tried to come to her senses and thought that she needed to concentrate, otherwise she would not succeed. but she was too excited. It was evident from her abrupt movements and face. She closed her eyes and screamed, summoning a water balloon. She was able to summon a water ball that turned out to be even slightly larger than usual. Katie looked at him hopefully, thinking to herself that it turned out great. She had never done so well before. But to her misfortune and surprise, the balloon burst anyway, spraying water in a circle. This surprised her again, and she screamed. The girl did not understand why she did it again if she did everything well. The guy himself looked at the situation questioningly. He noticed that when she was putting in magic power, some other force seemed to interfere. Her water ball was enveloped like 1,000 lightning bolts and lines. Trying to analyze it, he wondered where this power came from. And, looking at the sad and confused face of the girl, he finally understood what was the matter and what needed to be corrected. He ran back to his bag, which remained lying on the bench, and opened it and looked inside. The girl anxiously called out to him, but he did not respond. This time, he took out a small ring with a stone in the middle from his bag. "Show it to her," he told her to put it on. When he came back to her, he took her hand and put the ring on her little finger on his own. He realized that she still hadn't mastered mana control, and this ring was a temporary measure. After putting it on, she should try to use the spell again. From the outside, it all looked like a marriage proposal. Even the girl's neck and ears turned red. The realization that Kyle had given her the ring knocked her off balance. Stuttering, she said that everything was fine and she understood her task. But only a fool wouldn't notice from her face that it would be very difficult for her to concentrate right now. But still, she was able to pull herself together and, pulling her wand forward, conjured another water ball. This time, the magic did not dissipate and the water balloon did not fall apart. He calmly kept his shape. At that moment, Kyle realized that she could hold back her spell and shouted at her that now she needed to aim and release the spell. The girl, shouting that she understood him, waved her wand and sent her water balloon forward. She did it so abruptly and forcefully that the shockwave caused her body to fall backwards due to the recoil. A water balloon with a powerful blow hit exactly one of the targets from above that were attached to the frame of the glass ceiling. Looking up, she realized that she had hit the target, and even from such a long distance. She immediately started shouting out her friend's name. He immediately began to cheer Katie up, saying that she had succeeded. The girl seemed to get excited. She wanted to practice a little more, and seemed to be asking him for permission, maybe hoping that he would stay with her and watch it. From the fact that she succeeded, a real excitement awoke in her. She looked very animated, so the guy of course allowed her to go on. Finally, a soft, friendly smile appeared on his face again. The children did not notice at all that a shadow was watching them from around the corner of the training ground. This shadow. It turned out to be Freya's teacher. Watching them, she realized that she didn't have to worry about Katie anymore. But it's more complicated with Kyle. Thinking about it, she continued to watch them with a sly smile on her face. She realized that Kyle was already influencing Class F too much, but she still has one problem that she needs to solve. When she remembered her, the smile instantly faded from her face, and she became serious. The problem that I was very worried about was Sykes. It was as if a fire had started in the forest. Some trees were engulfed by a strong fire that rose above their tops. The reason for this was the guy's clenched fist that was engulfed in flames. Straightening his arm and putting it forward, the guy unclenched his fist and released a fireball forward. And his target turned out to be a thick tree trunk, which instantly ignited from his attack. The guy sighed, and the only thing spinning in his mind was that it wasn't enough. His magic should be stronger. He can't rely on his sword forever. Apparently, after the fight with Kyle, he realized this. If this continues, he will never rise to the top. This year's extracurricular activity will take place in the Forest of Demons, with a lot of monsters that come running from all sides. Just imagining it already gets creepy. Now each of the students is diligently training, trying to survive to the maximum of their strength. At the moment, someone like Sykes is training alone in the woods, trying to get stronger without help. Kyle is trying to teach other students to understand what they need to do and in what direction to move to become stronger. Those who recently cried because they couldn't do anything on their own can already shoot their magic at targets. Everyone hides their feelings, but everything will become clear in an extracurricular activity in the Forest of Demons. Hundreds of years ago, a dangerous dungeon was cleared by the hands of an academy teacher, an old magician in fairy tale clothes. A long black robe with wide sleeves and a long beard and hair that was whiter than snow. He had a hat wider than his shoulders on his head. In his hands he held a long wooden staff of a branch, which was fixed at the end with a large stone. He entered the heart of the dungeon and successfully seized control of it with an artifact. Thanks to his feat, a dungeon was born that is completely at the mercy of people. He created a magical seal with different patterns that helped in the creation of this dungeon. Since then, this dungeon has been used as a training ground for students, and they will have to conquer this dungeon today. An elf teacher with a long braid, glasses, and oblong piercings on both ears told them about this. He looked extremely formidable. At one point, as if trying to stun the guys, he shouted to them that the place of extracurricular activities would be the Forest of Demons. After hearing this, the children's faces were colored with horror and panic. But not all of them. Kyle seemed delighted with what he had heard. Delia, who was standing behind him, was ready to cry again, and Katie just looked a little surprised, apparently not fully realizing what she had heard. Extracurricular activities are provided for all first-year students. The children were indignant that they would go to the Forest of Demons, because there are probably a lot of strong monsters there. It was very scary. Teacher Freya told them not to worry. Teacher Riga told her that the dungeon was completely under human control. First, they will enter a magic circle that will take them to a random place in the forest. Secondly, the dungeon has a mechanism that, after 6 o'clock or when the boss is defeated, will transfer everyone inside out again. If they get badly hurt or give up due to lack of magical power, they will be kicked out of the forest. The magic will work like a catapult, picking up a person and carrying him away from this place. The teacher said that all actions would be recorded on a badge in his hand. If they defeat the monsters, they will earn extra points. At the end of the lesson, a list of the best students will be compiled depending on the points earned. If they take 1 talv or 3 places, they will be rewarded with money, artifacts, and medals. Therefore, they should strive for the best. The children were delighted to hear about the reward in the form of money. Kyle was thrilled that he would be able to win the artifacts. Kyle, inspired, immediately asked what Teacher Rigat thinks what artifacts they will be able to give them. Delia, who was crying behind him, was too worried to think about it, as was Katie, who also started crying with the baby. Someone shouted to the side that Class F should not even think about awards. Kyle instantly turned around at the noise, looking at the one who created it. It turned out to be one of Phoenix's acquaintances, the one who, at the end of the fight, angrily left the place where it was held. He believed that they should not expect awards, because they would all go to Class A. He wanted to tease the students of another class. Kyle did not hear what was being said to him, smiled and waved to the Turk, asking if he had finally come to apologize to Delia, who, now looking at him, cried even more and trembled. The Turk shouted that they were not going to apologize. Clenching his teeth in anger, he thought to himself that Class F had no chance of winning, but still something made him think. Off to the side by the tree, he saw a lone shadow, which turned out to be Sykes. He did not pay attention to what was happening at all, and thoughtfully looked away with his arms crossed over his chest, and then completely relaxed and closed his eyes, leaning against the trunk of a tree with his back. Turk wondered what was wrong with Sykes. It seems that he has not yet realized that he is now at the very bottom of the social ladder, but it seems only the guy himself thought so. He came closer to a former classmate, saying that in front of him was Mr. Sykes himself, who used to be in Class A. After these words, the brunette finally opened his eyes, paying attention to the noise around him. To this day, the Turk can't believe that even with a sword he managed to lose to someone from Class F. He said this with a clear bad deed, spreading his arms to the sides and putting his fists on his hips. He lifted his head up as if he had something to be proud of. He said that, because of him, the class is now considered weak too, so maybe he should take responsibility for it. It was as if he had stopped being afraid of the brunette and believed that now he had any right to make fun of him. The brunette instantly narrowed his eyes, trying to scare the enemy, and the air around him seemed to turn black. Turka was instantly scared and cringed. He did not understand what kind of look it was. Did Sykes really want to hit him? Someone else came up from behind, telling the Turk to leave the brunette alone, because even if he was transferred to the weakest class, he is still from a family of high-ranking aristocrats. He was the third son of Baron Holdenheim's family, called Jura Holdenheim. His first element is the wind. This guy had quite long white hair. He had long earrings in his ears and a long staff on his back. He added that maybe there is no strength of the brunette, but he is still from an aristocratic family. Sykes recognized Kaliura immediately, but it was clear from his eyes that he was definitely not happy to see him now. The blond man, immediately covering himself with his hands and asking for forgiveness, asked if he had upset him with these words. But it was clear from his face that he was not even apologizing for real, but only to make a joke. Behind them, sitting on the ruins of a destroyed building, someone called Kaliura, telling him not to put pressure on the brunette's sore spot. This was Garden Moltra, the second son of the Baron Moltra family. His first element was earth. He said that even if the brunette showed a good result, it would not change the fact that he was just a weakling. Garden had the appearance of a bully. Sykes called his name, and his eyes narrowed with resentment at what was happening. Daly stopped crying instantly when he noticed that the entire top three were right in front of them. But the blonde did not understand at all which three he was talking about. It turned out that Sykes, Kalura, and Carden, all three, are the best newcomers this year. But because their families compete, they don't really get along either. Garden understands that the brunette is also aiming for the best reward, but hopes that he will forgive them. After all, they are going to take the first and second place for themselves, and hopes that it is clear to him. Garden's expressions were extremely harsh and humiliating. Calming down, the brunette closed his eyes again, telling them to do what they want. It doesn't seem to concern him at all. Here, the Turk entered into the dialogue again, starting to laugh because no one would help him. He told the brunette to try to do something, because now he is even weaker than Class F. At this moment, the brunette compressed his lips, apparently trying to restrain himself somehow, and who knows, maybe he would have expressed a couple of harsh words in response. If Kyle hadn't stepped forward at that moment, and it was clear from his face that his mood had clearly deteriorated after what he heard. Sykes looked very surprised that the blonde man decided to interfere in this. Garden, with a bored face, asked Kyle if he really had any problems. Kalira looked at the blonde man as if he were an empty place. Realizing that the problem might be bigger, Delia and Katie began to worry. He said that he didn't have any problems, he was just very interested in something. He replied that he had left because suddenly his friend was being insulted here. Hearing his words, Sykes' eyes widened in surprise, and the eyes of his enemies looked more disbelieving or discontented. Delia realized that Kyle had decided to act as he always did to protect others. He ran forward, covering the brunette with his back. Holding his hands out to the side, as if he felt like a shield, he realized that he also had to help. He shouted that he was also not going to be silent when they laughed so openly at his classmate. As he spoke, he continued to cry. The brunette watched it silently with a strange expression on his face. He saw that the child in front of him was trembling with fright. Turk started laughing a lot, saying that weaklings love to play friends so much. Garden scratched his head in some embarrassment, and Kalira just sighed. The brunette with a calm expression walked away, saying that he had had enough of this nonsense. He asked them to leave him alone. They can do whatever they want, but without him. Kyle and Delia watched him go in silence. Freya suddenly appeared, asking if they were going to argue with each other for a long time. Regat also cut into their conversation, ordering everyone to stand in front of the magic circle right now. Finally, having gathered everyone together, the elf announced that their first-year extracurricular activity was about to begin. Standing behind him, Freya was smiling contentedly. They'd already sent several students on their way with the help of the magic circle, and continued to tell that monsters would appear endlessly. But that doesn't mean you don't have to fight them. A large number of students were already scattered in different parts of the forest. Next in line was Kyle, who also landed in one of the parts of the forest through a kind of magical catapult. Looking around, he saw strange trees with powerful roots. He was surprised that it was a forest of demons. He noticed there was a rather gloomy atmosphere. Closing his eyes, he decided that first he needed to feel the magical power coming from everywhere. Spreading his arms to the side and opening his palms, he used magic to create some kind of radar of his own. His mana formed many circles that radiated from him and penetrated further along the entire perimeter of the forest. With this, he realized that there were monsters next to him and several other students who had already fought with them. With the help of his radar, he also realized that this magical power was coming from Katie. His strength is so great that he even saw what position she was standing in now. It was clearly a defensive position. Deciding to move towards her, he realized that she was a little further away than he thought he needed to hurry up. Thinking about it, he moved in a second, breaking into a fast run through the roots of the trees. At the same time, Daly found himself in the company of two other guys. All three of them put their magic wands forward because there was already a whole crowd of monsters in front of them, and they had to defend themselves somehow. Of course, he was lucky that he met his classmates, but there were so many enemies there. Did they really fall right into the lair of monsters? It wasn't even embellished. At least 20 different creatures were climbing up the roots of the trees directly in their direction. His classmates realized that they could not cope with them in any way. They urgently needed to retreat, right now. They folded their wands and turned the other way to escape. Natalia was unable to dodge out of fear in any way and stumbled over a huge tree root starting to fall. At the same moment, one of the demons, looking like a wild wolf, had already opened its mouth to attack the defenseless child. At that moment, it was as if some kind of explosion had occurred and, opening his tear-stained eyes, Daly saw only flames in front of him and was very surprised by this. Right in front of him, a pair of 2 boots stood on the burnt part of the root. It belonged to Sykes, which surprised Delia very much. He was sitting on the ground with tear-stained eyes, looking like a brunette, holding his wand forward as if trying to protect him. He stared intently ahead while the baby, without taking his gaze away, watched him. At that moment, in another part of the forest, with the help of a water ball, one of the monsters was already defeated. Kyle praised Katie for her excellent work because she immediately hit the target. The girl agreed with him a little shyly, while he was delighted, clenching his fists, rejoicing for the 2 of them. She turned to him with a smile, saying that he had saved her after all, because if he hadn't come, she definitely wouldn't have coped on her own, and Katie was aware of this. The blonde realized that it was too dangerous in this forest alone, and Anthony came to her aid, but he did not even have time to finish when he saw movement not far from them. Right behind the bushes, 3 guys were running forward shouting, and ahead of them was Delia. Kyle called the child, and he heard his voice, and stopped. Flavel asked him where the brunette was now. The boy said that the brunette told him that he would detain the monsters on his own so that they could escape, so they did as he said. He was still crying while the other 2 guys were leaning against a tree trying to catch their breath. The child pointed his finger in the direction from where they came running and told Kyle that the brunette was there. He also added that there were a lot of monsters there, and he really hopes that Sykes will be okay. He was worried about him. Kyle used his power again and directed it into his eye, as if trying to scan the space to find out what was happening to his new friend. And it seems that he really saw something dangerous because he instantly took off without saying anything to others. The child could only call out to him. He ran with all his might, praying to himself that the brunette would wait for him, because he was already coming to his aid. Sykes himself was now in an extremely deplorable condition. It seems that he was injured because he was no longer even standing on his feet, and his cloak was covered with many stains. There was a lot of fire and smoke around him. The number of monsters around didn't seem to decrease. The monster suddenly attacked him, having managed to tear his clothes with its fangs and leave a wound on his shoulder. Although the guy reacted badly, he was able to neutralize this monster with the help of fire. No matter how many they killed, they all continued to approach him from all sides, surrounding him. The wound was already not only on his shoulder, but also on his head. He was going to fight anyway, clenching his teeth while the blonde tried to run to him faster to help. Using a fire arrow spell and aiming it at one of the monsters, he also defused it. Holding onto his injured shoulder, which hurt a lot, he thought about the monsters continuing to climb from all sides. If he is squeezed even harder, then he will definitely have no chance of winning. We need to find the weak spots and break through it. He noticed a gap in the front through which he could have passed, but suddenly the tree he was staring at was uprooted. Right in front of him was a strong demon that looked more like a pig. It was an orc, and Ion was already approaching the guy. He threw a tree that had just been torn out, but it managed to bounce off him. However, at the same moment, goblins appeared behind him, preparing to strike him with clubs. He realized that things were getting worse. He still couldn't dodge these blows and coughed in pain. Is it really going to end right here? Would he disgrace himself in front of his enemies and become the object of Garden and Kilure's ridicule again? With these thoughts, he recalled how Delia had defended him in front of his former classmates. He wondered if his classmates were able to escape, and if they were safe. After thinking about it, he found the strength to stand up and continue fighting. He was more shocked that he was worried about others in such a situation. This is extremely unusual for him. In his past, he remembered how, standing with his father on the balcony, he told him that he was the heir of the family and should see the world differently than others, and that he must be the strongest and the only way he can rise above all. As a child, he got the words into his head that he carried a burden further, that he should be the strongest of them all. When fighting with others, he only thought that he should be taller and stronger than these people. At one point, Kyle appeared in front of him, who, after winning, kindly extended a helping hand to him. Smiling brightly, he said that they could become stronger together. Because of these thoughts, he did not notice at all how 2 goblins approached him and grabbed his arms as if holding him in place. He thought of Kaljur and Gardena, thinking that all the others were just bricks on his way to the top. A huge bull was approaching him and was about to strike. But since he met Kyle, Katie, and Daly, something had changed in him, and he didn't understand what. The moment was spinning in his head like a crying Daly, when the brunette decided to save him, running away, thanked his friends many times for their help. Another blow, and the brunette, falling on his back, began to bleed. It's the end for him, he's already come to terms with it. But still, he thought it wasn't that bad. In a semi-fainting state, Sykes sat motionless, leaning on the roots of the trees, while the demon came closer and closer to him, swinging his huge club to strike. It seems that he didn't care about anything anymore. He had already come so far. The monster never completed its strike because someone beat it to it. Sykes raised his head in surprise to see what had happened. Looking closer, he saw only one leg and heard a voice saying that it was too early for him to give up. Kyle, standing next to him, waved to him and apologized for being late. Daylight was very surprised and asked why he was here. Having stopped listening to him, the blond man stared at one point without blinking with a detached look. It turns out that he noticed how badly his friend was injured. He asked to leave the rest to him. He could handle it on his own. He is determined to protect his friend. He stared ahead, concentrating. Kyle released huge waves of magical power, which caused the monsters in front and the brunette sitting behind him to be blown away by a stream of air. He used the magic radar again and tried to find out the number of monsters around them in order to defeat them. He shouted into the air, asking for wind arrows to fall on the head of his enemies. Sykes stared at him in surprise as the blond man used his wand to direct a strong stream of magic forward towards the demons. The horde of monsters was instantly shot, and nothing was left of them but black ash and smoke. The brunette looked at how he defeated so many monsters in 1 second. His magic power, where he got it from, was what he was most interested in right now. Screams were heard from the side, and the brunette turned to them. It turned out to be a crying Daly again with 2 classmates with whom they had recently run away, throwing everything at the brunette. The child screamed that he would also fight. But when he stopped and shook his head, he realized that all the monsters were gone. Kyle bragged that he was the one who beat everyone. Sykes, a little confused about the reason, asked why they had returned. Daly sobbed for forgiveness, but they couldn't leave their comrade behind and just run away. After these words, he was speechless. Katie came up behind him and handed him something. It turned out to be a healing potion. After drinking it, he will recover quickly enough. She said that there was no help from her, so she prepared more potions. Shocked, Sykes took the flask that was handed to him. A joyful Kyle said that they were all worried about him, that's why they came to the rescue. He used to think that even if it was an academy, it was still better for him to be alone. Classmates are just chains. He needs a strong person with whom he can compete. But apparently these thoughts didn't bother him anymore. He smiled at the guys and seemed to call someone friends for the first time. Still leaning against the tree trunk, he smiled and thanked them for saving him. All 3 blushed and were delighted. Daly saw the brunette smile for the first time. Kyle liked this turn of events. He held out his hand and told everyone to wait for Sykes to recover, and then they will go to defeat the local boss. The guys agreed at first, and then, when they heard about the boss, they got scared, and all their motivation instantly evaporated. Meanwhile, in the very center of the forest, Garden called Kalura, asking if it seemed that the monsters in front of them were some kind of strange. Unfortunately, his friend confirmed that he was not mistaken, but it was some kind of nonsense. After all, there were 2 monsters capable of absorbing magic in front of him. It was seen that on the field, among a huge number of trees, some students began a battle with 2 huge demons. 4 people hid behind bushes nearby. They were talking among themselves. I'm surprised that someone is already fighting these monsters. Were these 2 the bosses of the forest? But it was hard to believe that there were 2 bosses in this dungeon. After taking a closer look, they realized from the garden and the Kalura that it was the students of Class A who fought next to them. The brunette indifferently said that in this case they would easily deal with these 2 monsters. Well, Kyle interrupted him and said that this was not the case. He noticed that everything was not so simple. Sykes looked at him in surprise and asked him what he meant. These 2 monsters somewhat resembled a human in their bodies, but far exceeded them in muscle mass and height. They had long white beards and huge fangs with horns on their heads like demons, and there were stones attached to the chest. The A-class students were clearly exhausted and injured. It was not clear from their faces whether they were scared or just annoyed. Sykes and Kyle continued to watch what was happening from below. Garden, shouting, raised his axe behind his head and jumped up and struck one of the bosses in the shoulder. The stone on his chest shone as if reflecting a blow. The guy, twisting his face, flew off to the side. Everything turned out exactly as he thought, but he still decided to confirm his terrible fear. Jumping back, closer to the Kaliura, he called out to him. The latter immediately understood what he meant and agreed with him that now he was also sure that they were capable of absorbing magic. Classmates standing behind them shouted that they had to help the two of them and released water and fireballs towards the bosses. But Kalura only called them fools because they were clearly making a mistake. Each of their blows were absorbed by these two monsters without reaching them. On the contrary, after each of them, they looked more and more satisfied. Their grin turned into an evil smile, and their eyes shone. The blonde man, putting his hand forward, ordered not to attack them with magic because this only makes them stronger. Classmates didn't understand if he was serious. The blonde did not know what to do next in such a situation. They use wands as weapons, but they can only fight by covering their body with magical power. If he just attacks them with a spear, he will do almost no damage to the monsters. The same will happen if Garden uses his axe as a regular weapon. That is, now they are practically unarmed and helpless in front of these bosses. They don't understand at all how they can defeat the assassins of magicians. The guys remain standing in place, pointing their weapons at the monsters and wondering what to do in this situation. Kyle, sitting in the bushes, said that he had guessed this, but now he was also convinced that he noticed that these monsters absorb magical power. Sykes shouted that it was simply impossible where such a monster would appear in an extracurricular activity. Daly and Katie froze in surprise after hearing this. Sykes understood that no matter how hard they tried, if nothing was done, then Kalura and Carden would not be able to cope with these monsters alone. He abruptly stood up from the bushes and headed forward. Daly called out to him in surprise, asking if he was going to help them, but it wasn't long ago that they were laughing at him, humiliating him in front of everyone. The brunette replied that he was just following the path of a worthy heir to the Delaith family. It is his duty as someone who stands above them. Upon hearing these words, the trio was surprised and even a little confused. In general, Kyle did not expect anything less from him, but asked him to wait a little. He wants to return something to him. The brunette did not understand what he had to return to him. It seemed that he did not owe him anything. Opening up a space in front of him, he began to search diligently for something there. Kyle took out a weapon and handed it to the brunette. The man immediately recognized his sword in his hands. Had he already fixed it? He scratched his head and said that he wanted to return it a little later, because he's missing just one thing. Delight didn't understand what he was missing so far. He took the weapon out of its scabbard, and it immediately shone, emitting magic so strong that even his cloak flew back from the wind. Kyle explained that he had to share the power with the spirit inside the sword, and then he could become stronger than ever. A magical beast appeared in front. The guy with dilated eyes was watching what was happening. The front one is a real fire dragon that is able to breathe blue flames. If he recognizes it as his master, he will be able to use its true power by subjugating this magical beast. Kyle explained that he was just too strong for now, and even Sykes might have problems because of it. Notot was not listening at all and stood with his sword raised in the air. Because of his weakness, this sword had suffered, and he begged his forgiveness by covering his eyes. He admitted that he was still too weak and too arrogant, but promised to become stronger. Like his weapon, he will definitely change. Raising his sword arm up, the brunette asked to be allowed to borrow power from this weapon. He shouted that he swore that the sword would see him become stronger. Right in front of him, he saw a dragon and vague memories of his new friends who helped, pulling his hand in difficult moments. He could feel its power. The fire dragon wrapped around his body, accepting the burden. Closing his eyes, he continued to stand, holding his sword in his hands. The dragon was covering him with his fire. The guy mentally asked if he would give him strength one more time. When he opened his eyes, he saw sparks around him. Did this mean that the dragon had accepted him after all? Looking ahead, he saw a familiar sight. Kyle was holding out his hand and asking if he was going with them. And the brunette, of course, could not answer in any other way than with consent. A powerful shockwave appeared in the air. Garden was thrown into the trunk of a tree, and so hard that he even let go of his magic weapon in the form of an axe. Blood was coming out of his mouth along with his cough, and his eyes were white with pain. Kaliura was calling his name, trying to shout, but nothing came out. His friend was clearly unable to fight any further. Deciding still not to give up, the blond man rushed forward into battle shouting, knowing that his chances were not great. In general, this turned out to be the case when the spear seemed to be a millimeter from the monster's face, as if there was some kind of invisible barrier between them, preventing it from moving forward and dealing damage. The monster only absorbed his magic and became stronger. Having absorbed enough strength, he threw the blonde aside with one blow so that he dropped his spear and flew back. Other students watched Mr. Kaljura with their mouths open and tried to shout at him. Trying to get up from the ground with the help of his hands, the blonde man was trembling. He was the last one trying to tell the guys to run away from this place. His strength was clearly running out. He raised his head and looked at them with one eye closed. A stream of blood was dripping from his forehead. He was pretty beaten up and told others to run while they could still do it. And immediately saying these words, he passed out with Garden falling back to the ground. Students from all sides called two classmates trying to shout and ran to them to help. One of them tried to lift Mr. Garden. He was crying and did not understand at all what was happening. The second, throwing the blonde's arm over his shoulders, also did not understand what was wrong with this extracurricular activity. There was no need to warn about this in advance. Then why did they need these badges that were hung on them for tracking? Mr. Kalira was obviously heavier than him, so the guy barely held him without falling to the ground. They were able to lift their comrades off the ground, but the bosses had not gone anywhere and were swinging their batons right now in order to neutralize the rest of the children. They couldn't believe this was happening. They're from the strongest Class A. At that moment, the monsters shuddered. They clearly felt something about themselves. Two pairs of boots were getting closer to them. A second later, the children from Class A and the two dungeon bosses were separated by delight and flavor, that they were ready to protect the others. The brunette's former classmates were extremely surprised to see him in front of them, but he told them to stand behind them. Kyle turned around with a smile, telling them not to worry and to let them deal with it on their own. Someone was wondering where the F class came from. They saw that other children who came with the guys helped lift the wounded from the ground. The guy who was holding the hookah in his hands was clenching his teeth. He was clearly thinking about something, wondering whether to tell him or not. Nevertheless, he shouted to the one standing in front that the bosses were absorbing magic power in front of them, and they should be careful. The guys turned to look at him. Kyle winked with a smile and said that they already knew this but still thanked them for the information. At this moment, while his attention was focused on one of the guys, one of the bosses was already approaching him, swinging his baton. Sykes, noticing this, immediately clicked on the blonde man, trying to draw his attention. Undeterred by a single blow, he was able to fend off the huge boss's weapon. Everyone who saw this moment rolled their eyes in huge shock. Right in front, an F-grade student repelled an attack by one of the bosses with his bare hands. This made the demons very angry. Growling with all their might, they showed how angry they were. Kyle, banging his fists against each other, stood in a fighting stance, asking two monsters if they would like to dance with him. At this time, in the dungeon control room, the teachers watched through many screens with the help of student icons what was happening at the moment in the demonic forest. They saw two bosses on one of the cranes. Also, a huge problem is that the injured students are not transported outside. It was a clear glitch in the system. So the magic-absorbing monsters also showed up. Teacher Regod was in complete disarray. Turning back, he called out to Freya, asking if she was involved in this by any chance. He did not have time to finish, as, at one point, he heard screams. Everyone turned around and saw Freya trying to break the invisible fence. She managed to make a couple of dents in it, but she couldn't get more effect. She was in a great rage. Her face was contorted with anger. At this moment, Kyle was striking another blow at his enemy. Asyx was holding his sword in combat readiness, pointing it towards the monster. Freya explained to the others that at the moment the teachers are surrounded by a barrier that they will not be able to get through. The others ran up to her, asking again. They can't believe it and are hurt. She turned to the others and explained, so that there would be no misunderstandings, that there should have been ordinary monsters in the boss's place. Even she wouldn't choose something as weird as monsters absorbing magic, especially for the first year. A young teacher with glasses asked in surprise where these monsters came from. Given their situation, there can only be one answer right now. Someone specially separated them from the students and replaced the monsters with such difficult ones. The teacher with glasses called Freya again, saying that she was using magic to get all the students out of there. But she has already tried it 10 times, but the artifact in the center of the forest does not react at all. Freya started swearing. Her patience was running out. She couldn't let this become part of their academy's history. She tried to hit with new force in places where there were already small dents in the barrier. She told Rego to keep sending commands to the artifact, and she would try to break through the barrier. A young girl with glasses was calling Freya, and the elf, having accepted the command, ran to fulfill it. She mentally apologized to her students. In such a situation, it is wrong to rely on them, but as long as she doesn't break out, she has no other choice. Images of what was happening inside the dungeon were still changing on the screens with the brooches. Kyle's smiling face was visible on one of them. Freya watched him with one eye closed and realized that she could only rely on him now. The only one who can help the others is Kyle. At that moment, the blonde man was hitting the monster with his fist again. Without using any weapons, this was the only way they had to defeat this monster. He was hitting exactly the stone in the middle of his chest and saw some magic circles emanating from him. It was a curious enough observation for him. An attack with even the slightest trace of magic is completely absorbed, and all because of the crystal in his chest. Someone artificially created these monsters. He was able to figure it out quickly. But still, he has a couple of ways to kill these demons, and he chose which one he will use this time. He stood in a stance and channeled magical power through his entire body and every cell of his skin. He must not let the magic escape for a second. He will store all of it in his muscles and bones to strengthen himself. Leaning on one leg, he took off, moving straight like one of the monsters that was already waiting for him. He decided to aim exactly at the crystal in the center of his chest, believing that this would be the right decision. From the first blow, he hit, and did not see any resistance from the monster, or he did not have time to dodge the blow at all, not expecting it. The stone cracked in some places, disintegrating into fragments. And at the same moment, the blonde man used the Fist of the Storm, releasing all his magical power that he had left in his body. A huge amount of light was shooting out of the monster's body, as if incinerating it from the inside. Everyone around continued to be surprised that he had hit the monster with his bare hands, and without weapons, he was able to defeat such a strong monster. Dalen stopped talking for a second, and turned to the side when he heard something. It turned out that there were screams from one of the monsters, as Sykes was able to cut his shoulder with his sword. But after just a split second, the wound began to glow and heal. Sykes noticed this, realizing that even if he strikes with the sword, he recovers quite quickly. His sword has transformed and is covered with magical power. He will not be able to remove it now. What should he do in that case? He was called from the side, and he looked at where the sound was coming from. Kyle decided to tell him that the monster's power to absorb magic, but this could not be compared to its huge reserve. The blonde advised to just release all his magic and not hold back. The brunette was greatly surprised by his decision. Dalen immediately started asking questions. I don't understand Kyle's train of thought, because won't he absorb all the power as soon as Sykes releases it? The brunette thought about the words that the monster was no match for him and that he needed to release power. He still decided to trust the blonde's words and replied that he understood what he needed to do. To deal with the monster, you need a physical attack first. You just need to deal damage to the crystal, and then finish off the monster with your magic, as he did, having recently demonstrated to the others. But there is another way that is perfect for magicians. Pulling his sword back for a swing, Sykes once again summoned the great spirit dwelling in his sword to absorb its magical power. Daly noticed that the blue flames were beginning to gradually cover Sykes. The brunette asked to answer his call and fight the spirit with him shoulder to shoulder. He realized that the solution was simple, to the point of banality. He used a storm of magical power. With the help of a dragon, he released a huge amount of flame. Such power that the crystal located right in the monster's body will not be able to absorb everything completely. Sykes screamed with all the strength he had left, looking straight into the enemy's face. With his sword, he directed it forward. He released a huge wave of flame, aiming at the magical creature and hitting right on target. A fire dragon was flying over the battlefield, and the shock wave was so powerful that the children standing next to it fell off their feet. Among all this flame and smoke, only one black shadow was visible inside, which belonged to the brunette, who clutched a burning sword in his hands and looked, directly waiting for the result of his attack. Yet he was able to defeat this monster. Bursting into tears, Daly ran towards them with open arms, shouting that it was amazing. What good fellows they both are, because they were able to defeat such strong monsters alone. Sykes said nothing, and did not react in any way, silently listening to the child. Still, it was all very strange for Kyle, and made him think. Students who are exhausted or injured have not been rescheduled. In addition, the peculiarity of these monsters and this lesson itself could not be arranged by the teachers. There are too many problems here that the teachers definitely didn't need. The blond man felt something to his side and instantly turned to the side, startled. A strong blow flew straight towards him, which he managed to repel. It was a huge amount of flame that would have hit the target precisely if he hadn't reacted in time. To protect himself, he used a wall of wind and water, but to his great surprise, the opponent's blow was able to break through his wall. Those next to him asked what it was. Two palms appeared out of the darkness, clapping as if congratulating the children. A magician came out of the darkness like a shadow, who not so long ago stood on the mountain cliff watching Kyle and Sykes fight. All four of them looked at him in shock, it seems, slowly starting to realize everything. Kyle, removing the smile from his face, asked who this man was. The magician, smiling maliciously, stretched out his palm forward, creating a black magic ball in it. Before greeting them, he still has something to show them. Stretching out his hand, which was a ball up, black magic began to dissipate from it, falling into the air and creating a black dome above them. Kyle immediately realized that it was most likely a shadow barrier. Now, even the teachers who have finally made their way to them cannot do anything to help the children. Now the magician was ready to start whatever he had planned. Bones resembling hands began to come out of the ground. The children watched in horror, not believing their eyes. He smiled complacently, hiding his face. It was only clear that he was extremely pleased with the current situation. Kyle reacted too calmly so far and silently watched what the man in front of him was doing. Seconds later, they were standing in front of the skeleton army. Some of them were wearing armor and carrying weapons. There were definitely at least 20 of them at first glance. But still, the brunette later noticed that there were not only skeletons there. In the very center behind the magician, someone was emitting a very strong miasma. It was more like an anthill. From all sides of the forest, dark magic seemed to accumulate in one place, taking the shape of a pyramid. There was a huge skeleton right in front of them. His neck and arms were decorated, and there was a crown on his skull. He was wearing a black robe, and his collar was decorated with small skulls instead of fur. The magician decided to introduce him to the children. He called this creature the Lord of the Dead, the Lychee King. Katie and Daly nervously clutched their mouths and necks, making strange noises. A second later, the guys fell to their knees, clearing their throat, and the others did not understand what had happened to them. Sykes was not in the best position and tried to cover his nose and mouth with a sleeve. He suggested that the guys were hooked by the miasma that emanates from the King of the Dead. The lychee had terrifying eyes, and there was something glowing inside its empty sockets. Kyle, surrounded on all sides by skeletal warriors, stared steadily in one direction. McGrath laughed, thinking that victory was already on his side. He wanted them to let him hear their death cries. Delight was already preparing to defend himself when he saw how many skeletons were moving towards him and Daly. He raised his sword, preparing to counterattack, but suddenly his face distorted because a wall of light appeared right in front of him. The magician was confused, not understanding where the magic of light could come from here. He hadn't expected this, but everything became clear when they saw how, surrounded by a white glow, Kyle was approaching directly to the King of the Dead. He said he didn't care what kind of king he was, but he couldn't close his eyes to one thing. The most important thing is that he dared to threaten his friends. Upon hearing this, the brunette stared steadily in the direction of his comrade, who was getting closer to the monster with every step. Kyle, stretching his arms out, magically released a lot of light from his palms. His eyes seemed to go wild. He looked more like a maniac than a simple first-year student. He said he wasn't going to be polite to people like them. At these words, the magician looked at him strangely, apparently not understanding at all what was happening. The man in the raincoat laughed very loudly, mocking and asking Kyle very loudly what he would do now. The man in the cloak stood in front of his army of skeletons and undead, with the Lich King also standing behind him. Then, spreading his arms and pointing at the army of undead skeletons in front of him, the man in the raincoat asked Kyle very loudly and brazenly about what he could do when he was standing in front of an entire army of undead. Sykes, Delia, and Katie stood dumbfounded, staring at the undead army, not knowing what to say. But at this time, Kyle replied to the masked man that he was thinking about how he could best get rid of so many enemies. Kyle gathered magic into his hands, concentrating their power into his fists. And from the large amount of energy, Kyle's fists glowed with a bright light. Kyle stood menacingly, looking at his opponent and concentrating his strength in his hands. Then Kyle asked the man in the raincoat very seriously that he should end the entire army with one blow. Upon hearing Kyle's menacing words, the man in the raincoat clenched his teeth in anger and irritation without answering him. The entire army of skeletons and undead began their movement, gradually approaching Kyle with swords in their hands and with force. A man in a raincoat stood among them and held his staff in his hand, laughing loudly. Then he grinned at Kyle's words and mockingly asked him that he would destroy everyone with one blow. Then the man in the raincoat laughed out loud at his words, telling Kyle that he was just a little boy. Preparing for Kyle's attack and concentrating the power in his hands, he looked at the man in the cloak very seriously and asked him if he knew the weaknesses of the undead. After his question, the man in the raincoat slightly twitched her lips from nervousness. After that, Kyle put his hands on the ground, forcing his energy to pass through it. At this time, under the feet of the army of skeletons and undead, the earth shone with Kyle's energy and magical patterns also appeared on the ground. The entire army of skeletons and undead froze in one place while inside the magic circle, and among them was also the Lich King with a man in a cloak. The man in the cloak looked down where a magic circle was drawn for all the undead armies. The man in the raincoat froze, wondering that Kyle could create a magic circle, just like that in an instant. The place where everyone was, it shone because of the magic circle created by Kyle. Kyle then turned to his friends, who were dumbfounded at their fight. Kyle looked at them and smiled amiably, asking them to pretend they hadn't seen anything. Then the entire undead army was enveloped in holy magic, and among them the Lich King and the man in the cloak stood, dumbfounded, looking at Kyle and waiting for further outcomes. Kyle looked at them and told them that he was saying goodbye to them. After that, Kyle named his Holy Land spell as a sentence, after which the magic circle began to glow even more. The man in the cloak wanted to prevent this with his staff, but he did not have the strength. After a while, the magic circle shone, very brightly destroying the undead army and the Lich King inside. Then the holy circle went out, suddenly leaving behind a small smoke. A moment later, Delia very emotionally admired Kyle's abilities, saying that he got rid of an entire army of undead with one of his spells. Katie, on the other hand, was crying from the intensity of emotion and, crossing her arms, mentally thanked Kyle for saving them all again. Kyle stood pleased with his result, saying nothing and smiling easily. Sykes was standing behind Kyle, saying nothing and just watching Kyle's back. He looked very seriously at Kyle's back wearily, sighing and thinking that he was still very far away from him. After all this, Kyle turned to the man in the raincoat and told him that he had defeated his servants. Kyle then asked the man in the raincoat what he would do next. The man in the raincoat didn't react at first. Then he brazenly smiled at Kyle's words. Suddenly, at this time, right next to Kyle, the earth exploded from a great heat. The big bone hand of the Lich King began to come out of the place where the earth exploded. Sykes was very surprised by such an attack from the man in the raincoat and shouted in disbelief. The Lich King began to emerge from the ground with the help of his long bone arms. Once completely on the surface of the earth, the Lich King's eyes flashed ominously. The Lich King told everyone in a very low and intimidating voice that magic of this level would not work on him. Sykes stared at the Lich King in incomprehension and very surprised, while Dale and Katie looked at the king with fear in their eyes, waiting for his further movements. The man in the raincoat stood in front of Kyle and addressed him, saying that he had a very amazing magic. The cloaked man also added, saying that even a dozen clerics would not be able to activate light magic on such a large scale. The man in the raincoat looked at Kyle, who was standing in one place, considering his future plans. The man in the cloak smiled at him very ominously, mocking him and saying that it was such a pity that Kyle's spell couldn't help them. A man in a cloak stood with a staff in his hands and spread his arms, pointing at the Lich King standing behind him. He smiled ominously and laughed, saying that the undead lord didn't care about Kyle's magic. Then Dale, standing next to him, anxiously and fearfully asked Sykes that really, even Kyle would not be able to defeat him. Katie joined him, also excitedly denying, saying that the man in the raincoat was bluffing. Sykes didn't say anything back to them, just watching in surprise. Sykes recalled in his head that when a person with great magical power accepts death and darkness into his heart, he becomes a lich. But there was also someone who was much stronger than a simple lich. Sykes looked at the Lord of the Undead and could not believe that they were facing a legendary monster, which is legendary. The aura of the undead lord was very dark, sinister, and poisonous. It began to spread throughout the forest, after which, as a result, the entire forest and trees began to rot from such an ominous aura. Noticing this, Delia excitedly shouted to everyone that the forest was beginning to rot. Kate looked at the trees that were rotting in front of them and screamed in fear, also covering her head with her hands. At this time, the man in the raincoat began to laugh very loudly and mock the children, saying that their bodies would also rot in the near future. Suddenly, the earth exploded next to the Lord of the Undead, through which he spread his magical power. The Undead Lord sensed this and was a little surprised by it. Then the Lord of the Undead told the man in the cloak in his sinister voice that his magical power was being suppressed. The masked man was very surprised, asking him again. While the Undead Lord and the man in the cloak did not understand what was happening, Kyle came up to them and calmly informed them that he had created a barrier, and he did not want the Undead Lord to further harm the forest. Then, smiling at the Undead Lord and winking at him, Kyle asked him to show all his powerful magic to him. The Undead Lord was taken aback by Kyle's words and his overall reaction to the whole situation. Sykes, Delia, and Kate also looked at Kyle very dumbfounded, wondering at his similar reaction. The masked man also looked at Kyle more seriously and thought that he was smiling even in such a situation. The man in the raincoat looked at Kyle smiling and thought that he might have a problem with his head or something else. Kyle stood calmly with a smile and holding a small wooden stick in front of him. Then the Lord of the Undead agreed to Kyle and said that everything would be as he wanted. Then the Lord of the Undead gathered all his dark power into his hands and summoned darkness and his spell. The Lord summoned darkness and ordered him to turn into flames and incinerate his enemy. At this time, the man in the raincoat began to mock loudly, saying that this dark flame would not go out until it burned what he touched. He looked at Kyle and told him to burn, and that no bones were left of him. But at this time, ignoring all the words addressed to him, Kyle lifted a small wooden stick up. Everyone, noticing his movement, fell silent for a minute, watching him and even his friends. Suddenly sensing something at the top, the man in the cloak and the Lord of the Undead looked up to where Kyle's small wooden wand was pointing. They saw a big, bright light ball at the top. The masked man looked at the ball uncomprehendingly and mentally wondering what it was. Then Kyle, who was standing, still holding his hand pointing to the top, replied that he had gathered the magic power from the Holy Land at one point. The man in the raincoat looked dumbfounded at the ball again, dumbfounded, thinking that Kyle had gathered so much magical power into one point. At this time, the Lord of the Undead looked at the light ball and summoned his dark magic power. The Lord of the Undead ordered the dark force to absorb the light he hated. Then he gathered all the black flames in his hand and made it into a ball, sent it straight up to the light ball. The Demon Lord shot his dark flame ball at Kyle's light ball and cast his cursed flame spell. The cursed ball was flying straight at the light ball with great speed. All of Kyle's friends were looking up at the top, dumbfounded, watching what was happening, and there was also a man in a raincoat among them who was also watching everything that was happening. When the dark cursed ball was already close to the light ball began to shine very brightly. Then suddenly, the light ball became a light pillar and simply destroyed the dark cursed ball flying towards it. Also, under a bright and large pillar of light, the Lord of the Undead was caught, who also suffered a lot of damage. From such a bright light, all of Kyle's friends covered their eyes with their hand, just like the man in the raincoat. After a few moments, the large pillar of the light ball dissipated, leaving nothing behind. But Kyle and his friends were already on the ground, as well as the man in the raincoat. The Undead Lord was destroyed under the pressure of very strong light magic. Also, the dark dome that had been keeping them locked up all this time was broken, allowing bright light to penetrate inside. Kyle's friends shielded their faces from the bright sunlight and watched as the dark barrier completely disappeared thanks to the light pillar. Delia and Katie commented more calmly on what was happening, admiring it. Also, in the place where the Lord of the Undead used to stand, there was a small black ball wrapped in dark energy. Kyle picked up a small dark ball in his hands and looked at it, looking around from all sides. Looking at the dark ball in Kyle's hand, he commented that the Lich King was dead and only the core was left of him. Kyle then turned to the man in the raincoat and said he would ask him again. The man in the raincoat stood with his teeth clenched in annoyance. He looks at Kyle without saying anything. Kyle looked at him with a slight smile and asked him what he would do now. The man in the raincoat stood sweating with nerves and thinking about what had just happened in front of his eyes. He thought about how such a huge magic circle of light magic had destroyed the undead army in 1 second. Then, remembering the pillar of light spell, the man in the cloak thought dumbfoundedly that Kyle had incinerated the Lich King with just one spell. The man in the raincoat looked at Kyle with horror and thought to himself that he had never heard of a monster like Kyle in the academy. Kyle stood in front of him confidently and calmly asking the man in the raincoat about what he would do next now. Then he added, asking him that this was all the man in the raincoat was capable of. At this time, the man in the raincoat was sitting on the ground with his head down, and his left hand suddenly began to tremble. Noticing his trembling, the man in the raincoat cursed and grabbed his left hand in the hope of stopping the trembling. The man in the raincoat began to get even more annoyed and asked himself in surprise that he began to tremble. The man in the raincoat clutched his head. He irritably asks Kyle what his name is, but mentally cursed at the situation. The hero stood silently. Kyle, standing in front of him and putting his hands on his hip, very calmly replied to him that his name was Kyle Flayfield, and he studied in the first year of the Magic Academy. After Kyle's reply, the man in the raincoat took the small stone in his hands and irritably told Kyle that he would remember it. Kyle looked at his opponent in surprise. Kyle noticed a small stone in his hands and thought that it was a teleportation stone. At this time, the man in the cloak shattered a small teleportation stone, about to disappear from sight. But Kyle reacted very quickly, thinking that he would not let the man in the raincoat escape like that. Kyle grabbed his left hand and pointed his hand like a weapon at the man in the raincoat and then magically shot him. The man in the raincoat, unable to teleport, lost his balance and fell straight to the ground. Kyle, looking at him, thought that he needed another shot, but at this time, the man in the raincoat, who was losing his balance, had his hood pulled back, revealing his face to Kyle. Kyle was just watching him. The man with the raincoat on his face was almost the same age as Kyle and his friends, and had the same blonde hair as Kyle. The man in the raincoat looked at Kyle and told him loudly to remember him because they would meet each other again. Kyle stared at him, studying his face and saying nothing. The man in the raincoat put on his hood and, holding onto his head through the hood, angrily shouted to Kyle that next time Kyle would meet his end. After a few moments, he disappeared on the spot, teleporting to another place. Kyle and all his friends looked at the place where the man in the raincoat had stood before and froze, each thinking about his own. Kyle, on the other hand, recalled the face of the man in the raincoat and wondered that the man in the raincoat had magic stones on his head, and he did not know what it was. While Kyle was thinking about the man in the raincoat, Delia came up to him in tears, hugging him, thanking him, and saying that he had saved them all. Katie also came up to them in tears, asking Kyle how they could thank him. Kyle, with a smile on his face, and very awkwardly replied to everyone that he was glad they were all safe. At this time, Sykes also came up to them without saying anything. Suddenly, teachers ran to them from afar, asking them if everything was all right with them. She was very worried. Kyle reflexively covered his friends behind his back and called out to Teacher Frey in surprise. Delia came out from behind Kyle saying that Teacher Freya was injured, to which Teacher Freya replied that she was fine and she was glad that they were all safe. Teacher Regot had just run in with Teacher Freya and asked Kyle that someone else had just been here besides them. Kyle calmly replied to Teacher Regot that the man in the raincoat was most likely behind the whole incident, but he escaped. Teacher Regot asked him about it again in surprise. Kyle then pointed at the lifeless monsters and told the teachers that it looked like the man in the raincoat had changed all these monsters. The teachers looked in surprise where Kyle was pointing. Teacher Regot, seeing a large number of monsters, asked Kyle in surprise that he had defeated all these monsters, then added saying that these monsters absorb magic. Kyle confirmed his words and said with a smile that he and Sykes had defeated all these monsters. Teacher Regot, incredulously, asked Sykes if this was true, to which Sykes agreed, confirming Kyle's words. Teacher Regot was confused, asking them all how they did it, but he was interrupted by Teacher Freya, telling him that at the moment they need to think about the students. But suddenly, at this time, large white arrows began to fly off in the forest with the help of magical power. The teachers and everyone else looked at the forest watching. Then Teacher Regot happily informed everyone that the forest had finally started working. Teacher Regot informed everyone that the injured students were being carried outside. At this time, Sykes was surrounded by white magic, which forced him to ascend to the sky. Everyone looked at him in surprise. Then Sykes calmly told everyone that he didn't seem to have any magic power left, then apologetically said he would go first. When Sykes was about to take off first, Kyle suddenly grabbed him, stopping him and preventing him from taking off. Delia and Katie were very surprised by this action from Kyle. Sykes and Kyle were sitting on the ground, canceling the spell. Delia asked Kyle in surprise what he was doing. Teacher Rigot also asked Kyle in surprise that he was able to cancel his refund, to which Kyle responded positively, saying that he would talk to the teachers later. Then he added, saying that so much had happened today, but even in such a situation, everyone joined together and coped with the situation. Kyle said he was thinking that he wanted to come back with everyone together and they would discuss what happened. Kyle beamed at these words, asking permission from Teacher Rigot, to which Teacher Rigot, not convinced by his words, harshly replied to Kyle that he did not allow because there were still a lot of monsters in the forest. Teacher Rigot turned away from Kyle, who wanted to convince him once again, and, creating a small magic circle in his hand, presented it to his ear, saying that he would contact the headquarters and allow all the students to return. Teacher Freya looked at the whole situation and turned to Kyle's friends and asked them if they wanted to return with Kyle, to which Delia and Katie stared at her in surprise. When asked by Freya's teacher if they wanted to return with Kyle, Katie happily replied that she wanted to return with Kyle. Delia also joined her, happily saying that he too would like to return with everyone. Then Teacher Freya turned to Sykes, asking for his opinion on this. She was looking at him quite seriously, to which Sykes replied very seriously that if Kyle hadn't been here, each of them would be dead right now. At this time, Delia and Katie actively persuaded Teacher Rigot to let them all go back together. Sykes added, saying that Kyle says they should go together. Teacher Freya noticed a slight smile on Sykes' face, who said that he had no right to refuse Kyle's offer. Teacher Freya stared at Sykes in surprise, thinking that Sykes had never had such an expression on his face. Teacher Freya remembered her words, where she told Kyle that she was relying on him. She thought that maybe it was her selfish desire, but Kyle really did more than she thought. Freya's teacher looked at Kyle, who was a little sad, and she smiled to herself. At that time, Teacher Rigot had already contacted the headquarters and told them to evacuate the children right away. But Teacher Rigot was interrupted by Teacher Freya asking him to stop. Then Teacher Freya told him that the children should discuss everything themselves, and why not? Teacher Rigot looked at Freya in surprise, asking her a question. Teacher Freya went on to say that so many unexpected things happened in this extracurricular activity, and the recording of the battle also did not work, and today's lesson will not be counted. Everyone stared at Teacher Freya in surprise, and then Delia was irritably surprised and said that Kyle and Sykes had defeated the boss himself, to which Teacher Freya nodded, saying that she understood everything, and the teachers were all responsible for this. Teacher Rigot, listening to her words, suddenly told the staff to immediately begin the evacuation. He was stopped by Delia calling the teacher. But suddenly, Teacher Rigot added, saying that Kyle, Sykes, Delia, and Katie had not been evacuated from Class F. Everyone looked at him in surprise, not knowing what to say. Teacher Rigot scratched his head irritably and asked them if they were happy. But then, pointing at the teacher, Frey added, saying that there should be a teacher next to them. After that, Kyle happily turned to Sykes, saying that he could lean on his shoulder. Sykes calmly replied to Kyle that he didn't need it. Kyle argued with him, saying he needed it, to which Sykes had already fatally agreed with him, saying that everything would be as he wanted. Teacher Freya smiled as she listened to their light arguments. Then Kyle turned to all his friends and, holding Sykes with his shoulder, informed everyone that they were all coming back. Delia and Katie were standing happily next to them, having fun discussing all their battles. Kyle and his friends cheerfully returned back to their academy. Already in the evening at the academy, Kyle recalled the words of Teacher Frey about how she asked him to look at the director as he wanted to understand everything in detail. Kyle, having changed into a fresh suit of the academy, went to the office to the director. Kyle stood in front of the door to the office, holding his pen and thinking that the director was the most talented person in the academy, and he wanted to know what kind of person he was. Kyle knocked politely on the door, waiting for an answer from the director. From inside, the director told Kyle to come in, and Kyle very politely went into the director's office. In front of Kyle sat an old man with very long white hair and a beard. The director greeted him politely, calling him inside. The director's name was Tartarius Iliad, and he owned the 3 elements, water, earth, and wind. The director gave his name to Kyle and said that he holds the position of director at this academy. The director asked Kyle to sit on a chair, to which Kyle slowly walked over to the chair and sat down on it. The director apologized for getting straight to the point and asked Kyle that he already knew what he was going to ask him. Then the director stared at Kyle and asked him how he defeated all those monsters, and the one who summoned the monsters was the man in the cape. Then, making it clear to Kyle, he asked him to tell him everything in detail. Kyle stuttered a little at first and, with an awkward smile, said how best to answer. Inside, Kyle thought to himself that hiding the magic of light was very difficult. Unable to stand the weight, the director asked him that there was something special there, to which Kyle shook his head, denying and saying that it wasn't like that at all. But suddenly a female teacher, whose name was Milna, appeared near the door. She told Kyle that he didn't need to hide anything from him. Kyle was very surprised by her arrival, calling her by name. Teacher Milna smiled lightly, replying to Kyle that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Kyle asked her in surprise why she was at the academy. Then the principal answered for Milne's teacher by telling Kyle that she was his old friend and she had told him a lot about Kyle. Teacher Milna was standing next to the principal's desk, just looking at Kyle. The director of the academy added, saying that the only student of Milne's teacher is he, Kyle Flayfield. Kyle was very surprised to think that his teacher and the director of the academy knew each other. Sighing with relief and holding his chest, Kyle told them that they should be warned about this. Teacher Milna looked at him with a smile and told him that then she would not have been able to see Kyle. Remembering his question, Kyle asked her teacher Milna about what she had forgotten at the academy and why she was here. To which teacher Milna replied that she wanted to check something about the secret of the seal of this academy. Kyle asked her in surprise about the seal. Then teacher Milna said that she came to the academy because of the investigation and the latest incident confirmed her fears. Kyle looked at her in surprise, listening to her words. Teacher Milna said that because of this, she wanted to ask Kyle to investigate, and that was her order, but then shaking her head said that it was not an order but her request. Deep beneath the academy, a terrifying beast was sealed in a large black cocoon that hung from the ceiling. He used to be a dragon, and there were rumors that he burned anyone who caught his eye. Kyle was still surprised to ask Milne's teacher about the sealed dragon at the academy. Teacher Milna did not know what to answer at first. Then, after a few moments, she answered him that besides all this, something else was hiding there next to the seal, and this was the entrance to the press in the classroom of Class F. Kyle opened his mouth in surprise and didn't know what to say. Then, very excitedly, he asked Teacher Milne again about the passage to the seal in Class F. Milne's teacher confirmed his words, saying that everything was correct. Then Teacher Milna added, saying that this academy building is under the effect of strong magic, so it could not be rebuilt. Kyle seemed to understand everything and said loudly that this was why this building was in such a state, and he thought that this was one of their ways to mock Class F. Teacher Milna looked away, and touching her chin and making a thoughtful face, said that if you think about it, it really looked like that. The director, who was sitting on his desk and all this time silently listened to everyone, raised his voice saying that they had one problem. The director added, saying that first, they need to find an entrance to the press. Kyle was surprised to ask the director if he didn't know exactly where the entrance was. Teacher Milna answered for the director, saying that the seal is a very strong source of magical power, and the building itself is covered with powerful magic. Teacher Milna added, saying that the two sources of magic overlap and the entrance to the seal is constantly moving. Making a thoughtful face again, Teacher Milna suggested that the entrance must have been sealed in a hurry. Kyle looked at Milne's teacher and asked her if this dragon was that strong. Teacher Milna told him that, according to legend, the dragon is very strong, but when she saw him, he was covered with miasma. At this time, the director told Kyle that they should not worry, because he is bound by strong magical shackles, because, in the worst case, these shackles could weaken, and therefore they want to know for sure. Kyle thought a little about the entrance, which is constantly moving, and about a very strong dragon underground. The principal looked at Kyle very seriously and told him that he was Milna's only student and asked unexpectedly that he couldn't do it. Kyle, who had been thinking about the entrance and the dragon all this time, thought very excitedly that it sounded very interesting. Then, blushing with excitement and smiling, Kyle with fiery eyes told them to leave this matter to him. The principal was very surprised by this reaction of Kyle, and Teacher Milna, as if expecting such a reaction, smiled happily at Kyle. After a little thought, the director agreed with Kyle and said that he would lead this investigation. Kyle agreed and shouted very excitedly at the director's words. The director of the academy sighed and told everyone to return to the main topic. Kyle lowered his head to the side and looked questioningly at the director, asking about the main topic. The principal told him that it was about today's extracurricular activity, and the principal wanted to ask Kyle about it. Remembering the main topic, Kyle awkwardly scratched his head, saying that he remembered. The director calmly asked Kyle to tell him everything that happened there without concealment. Kyle agreed with his words and began his story about the extracurricular lesson. Some time after Kyle's story, the director, having understood everything, listed all the dangerous moments with dangerous monsters, the man in the cloak and the Lich King. The director thought for a moment, lowering his head onto his folded hands in front of him. Teacher Milna looked at the principal and inquiringly asked about Tartarius. After a little thought, the director called Kyle, drawing his attention to himself. He thanked him as a representative of the academy and said thanks for saving the academy from disaster. The director bowed his head in front of Kyle as a thank you. At this time, Kyle, out of awkwardness, asked the director not to bow down in front of him, actively waving his hands. The director, holding his dizzy head, told Kyle that he had done a great job, and bowing his empty head was the least he could do now. Then the director added, asking Milne's teacher about what could please Kyle, because he also deserved a reward. Teacher Milne thought for a while, and came closer to the director and lowered her head into his ear, whispered something, covering it all with her hands. After hearing this, the director was surprised, as if understanding the words of Milne's teacher. Then, very seriously, he began to talk about how he, Tartarius Ilias, the director of the Magic Academy, gives Kyle the right to one wish, and only one. Then the director laughed, saying that it was a strange award. The director turned to Kyle and asked him if he would really like this, and asked Kyle not to be afraid of him. Kyle looked at the director thoughtfully at first, and then nodded in agreement to his question. Kyle replied to the director very excitedly and with bright, burning eyes that he would use it when the time came. The director looked at him for a moment, wondering what Kyle would ask when the time came. Then the principal told Kyle that tomorrow he would introduce him to a teacher who would help him with the printing, and it would be useful for Kyle. Kyle agreed and told him that he would go to his room. Leaving the principal's office, Kayla was escorted by Teacher Milne, standing near the door of the principal's office. At this time, Teacher Regot was standing very quietly around the corner in front of the office, who was watching what was happening near the principal's office in the shadows. But Milne's teacher noticed him, without letting him know that she noticed him. The girl acted as inconspicuously as possible. Meanwhile, Kyle came to the dorm's recreation room in a good mood, and greeted all his friends. Sykes, Delia, and Katie were excited about Kyle's arrival. Delia was very nervous and was the first to ask him why the director had summoned Kyle to his office. Katie joined him, asking Kyle if the director was swearing at him. Kyle, denying all their nervous thoughts, told them that he was fine and there were no problems. Then Sykes approached him and calmly asked him what he was talking about, and assumed that something had definitely happened there. Kyle wanted to answer Sykes, but was interrupted by Caliura and Garden coming up from behind. Kyle and Sykes paid attention to them, expecting a question from them. Calbura and Garden calmly and very proudly apologized for the interruption and greeted them. At this time, Sykes covered Kyle with himself, irritably asking Calbura and Garden about what had happened. Kyle, standing behind him, called Sykes, calming him down. And then Caliura, remembering those big monsters in the forest, asked Kyle and Sykes if they had defeated those black monsters. To which Kyle calmly replied to them that he and Sykes had defeated the monsters one-on-one. Calbura and Garden, hearing his words, were very surprised and opened their mouths and looked at Kyle and Sykes. Garden couldn't help but ask Kyle and Sykes in disbelief if they were serious about this and how they did it. To which Caldura irritably asked Garden to shut up. Then all the other students in the dormitory noticed their conversations and watched them. At this time, Garden asked them in surprise that it was still true, because the rest of the students were talking about it. Then, suddenly, Caliura bowed respectfully in front of Kyle and Sykes, thanking them for saving his life. Garden and the other students looked at Caliura in surprise, not knowing what to say. After a respectful bow, Caldura straightened up and said that he had heard that they had not only saved them, but also helped the others to evacuate. All the students watched them without saying anything, waiting for further words. Then Caliura humbly lowered his head and asked Kyle and his friends for forgiveness for being rude to them, and he really regretted it. Calora called Gardena, forcing him to ask for forgiveness. Garden scratched his head irritably though, saying that he knew everything. Then, very suddenly and loudly, he thanked Kyle and his friends for his rescue. Kyle, Sykes, Delia, and Katie stared at them in great surprise. Then Kyle told everyone very loudly, and with a smile, not to worry. Spreading out his arms as if in a hug, Kyle continued saying that they were all fellow students at the same academy and it was logical to help each other. Kalira and Garland did not expect such a reaction from Kyle, and they felt embarrassed for such kind words from Kyle. Delia and Katie, on the contrary, were happy about what had happened and agreed with Kyle's words. Kyle D looked at everyone with his bright smile, sharing his good mood. But unable to resist his curiosity, Garden asked Kyle about how they had defeated those monsters after all. To which Kyle cheerfully and clenching his fists replied to Garden that he had hit with all his might. Sykes, who was standing calmly, also replied to Garden that he cut them all down with all his might and everything was simple. Garden was very taken aback by such responses from Kyle and Sykes, and he asked them to explain in more detail. After that, all the students in the dorm started laughing loudly at their answers and Garden's reaction. Then I happily thought that they were lucky and hoped that everyone would be able to get along with each other now. While everyone was standing and actively discussing something in the common room of the hostel, a Turk was standing in the shadow outside the dormitory doors, looking at them very angrily. Garden and Sykes discussed their victories with the black monsters. Looking at them, Turk gritted his teeth irritably and left the dorm rooms. Meanwhile, the director of the academy stood in his office on the balcony and thought about Kyle, saying that he was a very interesting boy and he expected great things from him. The principal thoughtfully regretted that there was no other teacher for Kyle, and he hoped that the teacher would cope with his task. At that time, various chemicals were being brewed in the research tower of the academy, which created a fog around the room. A girl, whose name was Alicia with a long black ponytail, came into the tower and called Lady Relicia. Alicia was looking around the study room and complained to Professor Alicia that she had messed up the room again. Alicia looked at Mrs. Relicia in a puzzled way and said that she was constantly cleaning up after her, and asked Professor Relicia to start cleaning up after herself. To which Professor Relicia, with a mad smile, ignoring all her words before, told Alicia that he had come on time. Professor Relicia happily informed Eliza that she had found a new combination. Eliza was at that time removing books and notes from the floor and looked at Mrs. Relicia in surprise after hearing what she had heard. Professor Relicia, like a real chemist genius, laughed madly and told himself that this was definitely a sign of fate. Mrs. Relicia held the small flasks in her hand and lifted him up, looking at him admiringly and saying that she had a feeling that something amazing was going to happen soon. Eliza stood by, not understanding the meaning of her words. The next day, Delia, in the building for Class F, asked Kyle in surprise about the secret seal of the academy, to which Kyle confirmed this by saying that his teacher is an acquaintance of the principal, and yesterday they asked him to examine the seal. Delia smiled awkwardly, addressing Kyle, saying that it was hard for him to imagine how the director himself asked Kyle about this, to which Kyle smiled easily, just agreeing with him. Then Kyle looked at his friends, and suddenly asked them if they were ready to help him, to which Delia and Katie stared at Kyle in surprise. Then Kyle happily spread his arms and with a smile invited everyone to solve the mystery of the academy. Sykes, Delia, and Katie looked at him in surprise and didn't say anything. Then after a few moments, Delia excitedly asked Kyle that they would also go with him, to which Kyle agreed, and then Delia nervously asked Kyle that it was very dangerous. At this time, all four of them were standing under the dome in the classroom, which protected them from prying ears and glances. Kyle, making a thoughtful face, told everyone that according to the director, the seal had turned into a maze and there could be monsters, and at the very end a dragon was sealed. With every word he heard, Delia's face was distorted with fear. But after interrupting all the worries of his friends, Kyle smiled happily, saying that they had nothing to worry about. Delia nervously asked Kyle if it was worth thinking so unreasonably. But then Delia heard Sykes reply to Kyle that he didn't mind and looked at him. Sykes said very seriously that he felt that he had become stronger after the battle in the forest. And clenching his fists and looking at them, Sykes said that he wanted to test himself in battle. Then Sykes, looking at Delia and Keith, told them that they too had overcome a deadly ordeal and could be at least a little more confident in their abilities. Katie excitedly told everyone that she was afraid she would get in the way, but if Kyle wanted to, then she agreed to go with him. Delia nervously scratched his head and stammered that he too would go with them. Kyle was very happy and cheerfully told everyone that their squad of detectives was assembled. Everyone happily looked at Kyle, agreeing with him. Suddenly, Kyle noticed someone behind the soundproof barrier. Kyle looked at the girl with the ponytail, who was talking to them behind the protective dome. Having expanded his barrier, Kyle let her into them and politely asked her what happened. This girl was Eliza. After she went inside the barrier, she said with displeasure that Kyle finally noticed her because she had been trying to shout at them for so long. Kyle awkwardly scratched his head and apologized to Elise, saying that they had a secret meeting. Eliza was surprised, asking again about the secret meeting. Then, making a thoughtful face, Eliza suggested aloud to them that it was really connected with the secret of the academy. Kyle was surprised by her words without replying. Then Eliza introduced herself to everyone with a smile, introducing herself and saying that she was a third-year student. Eliza told them all that she had come with a message from Professor of Alchemy, Relisha Nave. Eliza turned to Kyle, asking him that his name was Kyle, to which Kyle agreed. Eliza smilingly informed Kyle that the professor was waiting for him in the research tower, and then asked Kyle if he would go with her. To which Kyle, remembering the words of the principal, said that the principal had said to introduce him to the teacher, and nodded in agreement to Eliza's question. Elise, also delighted, asked him to follow her. But as soon as Eliza walked in front, showing Kyle the way to the professor, Kyle's friends joined them from behind. Eliza did not expect this and turned to everyone, not understanding, asked them that they were also going with her, to which Kyle very calmly agreed and said that he had asked them and asked Eliza for permission. Elise slowed down and thought a little about Kyle's offer. Without thinking twice, Eliza nevertheless fatally agreed to Kyle's proposal. Kyle was very happy about that. Eliza, looking at Kyle, added, saying that such things do not bother the professor, and, in fact, perhaps the professor will only be happy about it. Eliza cheerfully told everyone to follow her, to which Kyle happily and cheerfully thanked her. After a while, Elise, Kyle, and his friends arrived at the research tower. Outside, it was white and very high. Outside the tower, there were different pipes allowing smoke to escape to the street. Sykes still calmly looked at the tower and asked that it was a research tower. Delia also looked up and noted that he did not know that there was such a place in the academy. Kyle and Katie were also looking up at the tall tower. Eliza went through the door to the research tower and informed everyone that almost none of the first-year students came here. Kyle, Sykes, Delia, and Katie all followed Eliza. Entering the tower, they all saw in front of them a long, rounded staircase that led up. Kyle looked at the staircase and admired how many steps it had. Delia also looked at the stairs and asked with fear that they needed to climb up these stairs. To which Eliza stood on the first steps of the stairs and told everyone not to worry, because they would be lifted to the very top by magic. Kyle was the first to run after Eliza, and going upstairs with her, waved to his friends telling them to follow them, and it was a lot of fun. Delia looked at Kyle and asked him in surprise when he managed to get in there. At that time, Katie climbed up the stairs and said that it was really very convenient. Sykes followed Katie up the stairs in silence. Delia looked at them without expecting it and asked everyone to wait for him. Then Delia was about to climb the first step, when the ladder began to wobble very much, and everyone else almost lost their balance, but they were held by the railing of the stairs. Delia, who wanted to climb the stairs, was very scared going back down. After the staggering was over, Kyle asked the Elise standing in front that it was an earthquake. Eliza herself did not immediately respond, but then turned around and smiled at the others, saying that everything was fine and she knew what it was. Suddenly, Eliza screamed at the top of her voice, calling for Professor Relisha. She needed to call her urgently and introduce her to friends. Eliza called Professor Relisha very loudly and quickly ran upstairs to her. When Eliza opened the door to the study, the room in front of her was all in a haze. Eliza asked with displeasure, waving away the haze, that Professor Relisha's experiment had failed again. Eliza went to the back of the room with the haze and opened the window wide to ventilate the room. Eliza's eyes found Professor Relisha, who was standing by the window and was displeased, telling her that she had asked her not to do anything without Eliza. Professor Relisha coughed from behind the haze and sighed with fatigue. Professor Relisha was sitting on the floor and sadly talking about how she thought she would definitely succeed this time. Professor Relisha had the element of water. After the haze in the room cleared, Eliza looked around and noticed the mess in her office again. Eliza, holding her head, told Professor Relisha that there was a mess again, and she told Relisha that they would have guests. Professor Relisha, ignoring Elisa's hysteria and adjusting her glasses, asked in surprise which guests Eliza was referring to. Then, at this time, Kyle, Sykes, Delia, and Katie came into their office. Seeing them in front of her, Professor Relisha smiled in surprise, asking what a group of students were doing here. Eliza was even more stunned by the professor's question. Eliza very nervously and excitedly reminded the professor that the principal had sent her a paper that the students were supposed to come today. Eliza hysterically asked Professor Relisha if she had forgotten about it, to which Professor Relisha did not know what to answer at first, and mumbled, remembering Eliza's words. Then the professor bowed in front of Eliza, asking for forgiveness and saying that she had completely forgotten about all this. Eliza became even more nervous from the professor's bow and waved her hands telling her not to do this, because Eliza felt like some kind of tyrant. Professor Relisha straightened up, asking Elise if she wasn't a real tyrant. Eliza called out to her loudly, asking her to stop. Then, turning to Kyle and his friends and smiling awkwardly, Eliza said that she would clean up everything here and asked them to wait for them outside. Kyle at this time took out his little wooden stick and offered his help. And with a wave of his wand, Kyle collected all the books lying on the floor, gathering them up in a pile. Eliza and Professor Relisha looked at Kyle's abilities and were very surprised to stare at them. Kyle ordered the books to fly to their places on the shelves, which immediately sent all the books flying to their shelves. At this time, Katie noticed one broken thing and called Kyle, saying that one thing was broken there. Kyle turned his attention to her and thanked Katie for her help and collected all the broken pieces. Professor Relisha, adjusting her glasses, looked in surprise at how Kyle was putting all the things in their places. Eliza also looked at Kyle's abilities in surprise and asked the professor what was going on. After all the cleaning, Kyle and Katie stood in the middle of the cleaned room and announced with a smile that they had finished everything. Eliza began to admire Kyle, saying that she had never seen such wind magic. Eliza then turned to Professor Relisha, who stood with her head bowed in silence. Professor Relisha, suddenly getting up from her seat, quickly ran to Kyle, jumping on him and admiringly saying that he was just amazing. Professor Relisha started asking Kyle a lot of questions about which class he was in, whether Kyle only knew wind magic, and where he learned to use magic like that. Eliza unhooked Professor Relisha from Kyle, telling him to keep his distance. Professor Relisha kept asking Kyle about his magic, and asking him to show her all his magic and tell her about himself. Sometime after Professor Relisha calmed down, she apologized to Kyle, saying that Kyle surprised her, and she went off the rails. Professor Relisha added, saying she hoped Kyle wouldn't be mad at her. To which Kyle, on the contrary, joyfully replied to the professor that when you are interested in something, it is difficult to control it, and he perfectly understood this feeling. Professor Relisha agreed with him, saying that it was true and they would get along with each other. Delia, looking at them, thought that they were both of the same field of berries. Kyle introduced himself and said that he was from Class 1F, and hoped that the professor would be able to help with his investigation. Professor Relisha scratched her head getting to know Kyle and asked him unexpectedly about what kind of investigation, to which Kyle replied a little awkwardly to the professor about the dragon seal. He even brought his hands to his face out of embarrassment. After hearing Kyle's words, Professor Relisha suddenly started digging through her books looking for information about it there. Eliza called Professor Relisha with displeasure, saying that Kyle had gathered them all just recently. Kyle was just watching the professor's sudden reaction. Professor Relisha pulled out some books and said that the dragon seal is the oldest secret of this academy. Then the professor excitedly asked Kyle that he too would try to solve the mystery to which the professor had devoted his whole life. Kyle answered her question in agreement. The professor fell silent for a while, saying nothing. Then Professor Relisha seriously said that it was great and she would tell everything she knew. But in exchange, Professor Relisha, with a sly smile, asked Kyle to tell her everything he knows. Kyle and all his friends looked at the professor in surprise without saying anything. Then Eliza looked at Professor Relisha and called her. At this time, someone was standing behind them outside the door, listening to all their conversations. Last night, before the teacher left, Milna, the principal, and Milna stood on the balcony under the protection of a soundproof barrier. Then the director started the conversation first, saying that the great darkness had made its move. Milna looked at the director seriously and said that she was worried about this man in a raincoat, and everything was much more serious than she thought. Milna then added, saying that there are spies in the academy. The director replied to her seriously and calmly that they could only guess what they were trying to achieve. Then he added, saying that those who see this as an opportunity will take advantage of it, and this investigation will be a very dangerous mission. Milna agreed with the director, saying it was dangerous. The director looked at her in surprise. Milna continued saying that if she couldn't handle it, then only he could, and asked her to believe in him, the one who can use all the elements, and Milna's only student in her long life is Kyle. Professor Relisha screamed in surprise, asking Kyle that the entrance to the seal was somewhere in the Class F building. The professor's face showed a very vivid excitement from the whole situation. Kyle stood in front of her and said that he too was very surprised. Professor Relisha turned her back on them, walking and thinking that it was true that only the class teacher could go in there, and students of other classes were also forbidden entry. Suddenly, Professor Relisha began to dig through her notes and books again, and already calling Eliza and saying that it was time for that very artifact. Eliza was surprised by the professor's words, not believing her and clarifying about the artifact. Then Professor Relisha, taking off her glasses and putting on another copy of them, confirmed Eliza's words, saying that this was their main trump card in finding the seal. The girl was literally glowing with joy. Professor Relisha, with an excited smile and pointing to her glasses, said contentedly that able to reveal even the greatest secrets of ancient magic, these are magic glasses. Eliza looked at the professor, embarrassed, and said that she hadn't seen them for so long, but the glasses still looked so good on Professor Relisha. Together with Eliza, Katie also admired the professor. Kyle looked questioningly at the professor and asked her how the magic glasses would help them, to which Professor Relisha laughed merrily and replied that these magic glasses allow them to see magical power, and with their help they will be able to see the secret entrance to the seal. Professor Relisha added, saying that she had already searched for him all over the academy but could not find him because she did not know where to look. Then, with a glowing look and agitation, the professor said that they now knew his location. Holding her lab coat and cheerfully telling everyone to go with her, Professor Relisha walked forward without looking anywhere. Eliza, worried about her from behind, called the professor and wanted to warn her about the wall that stood in front of the professor. But before she could warn the professor, Relisha hit her head against the wall, not seeing her in front of her because of her glasses. Eliza ended her warning words by telling the professor that she did not wear these glasses and was careful. Kyle, looking at this scene, just smiled. Taking her magic glasses from Professor Relisha, Eliza put them on herself and said that this role would be on her. Kyle, Delia, and the others were pleased with Eliza's decision. Professor Relisha, putting her casual glasses back on, awkwardly thanked Eliza for her action. Why, very fervently and confidently did Professor Relisha tell everyone that they were going to the forbidden class. F. Kyle nodded in agreement and went with her. After a while, everyone arrived at the Class F building and began searching every corner and every room for the secret entrance to the seal. Eliza, putting on her glasses, looked very carefully at all possible places looking for an entrance. Being next to Sykes, Eliza reported that there was nothing in the places that were used daily and told Sykes to move on together. But Sykes noticed a secret passage in the wall, which was blocked by wooden boxes and tools. Sykes was surprised to think that there was a secret passage in the storeroom behind the wall. Then, pushing aside all the wooden boxes and tools, Sykes found a small, dark passage. Sykes called Eliza loudly, and Eliza, hearing his voice, immediately ran to him. You could tell by her face that she was worried. Sykes was standing inside, using fire magic to light up the entire room. Eliza came running to her, examining everything inside through magic glasses, and was surprised by what she saw. Eliza immediately called everyone else, asking them to come here. Kyle and Professor Relisha immediately noticed Eliza's voice and ran to her. Kyle saw a closed door in front of him and asked Eliza in surprise that there was a door here. Then Eliza noticed that this door had neither a handle nor a lock. Professor Relisha calmly created a magic circle in her hand and asked everyone not to panic and said that this was classic seal magic. The girl was sure that she would be able to open this door. Professor Relisha used her magic directly on the door to create a magic circle. The heroes standing next to her watched the professor's actions in surprise. They were very interested to know what was going to happen now. A few moments after Professor Relisha's magic circle passed through the door opening the seal, the door opened on its own. Delia, who had already run up to them and was standing next to them, happily noticed that the door had opened. Eliza also joined them, proudly saying that Professor Relisha is an expert in seal magic. Kyle and Katie began to admire Professor Relisha even more after hearing from Eliza. Professor Relisha replied very awkwardly that it was nothing important and asked Kyle and his friends not to praise her. Opening the door, Professor Relisha looked at her friends and happily said that they would finally find the dragon seal. But when Professor Relisha opened the door, Eliza noticed something dark behind the door, like a clot of dark energy. The girl was wary because it scared her a little. Eliza reacted very quickly and pushed Professor Relisha away without letting her get hurt. She threw magic at her, trying to push her away from the door. The girl was ready to do anything to save the professor's life. But at that time, the door opened very wide, and Kyle asked Eliza about what happened. Elise didn't answer him and immediately used her wind barrier to protect everyone from the black energy. Suddenly, holding the wind barrier, Eliza began coughing up blood, But even through the bloody cough, Eliza tried to protect everyone and asked everyone to move away from the door. The girl continued to hold the wind barrier to protect her companions. Everyone was very surprised by her cough, and Professor Alicia was completely scared for Alicia calling her. Then Alicia, holding the black haze, told everyone that it was a trap and the poisonous gas was coming from this door. Suddenly, Kyle came up to Eliza, who was holding the poisonous gas with her barrier, telling her that he would help. Eliza was very surprised by his arrival, and Kyle used his wind net magic. Thanks to Kyle, the wind barrier became even wider and more powerful, forcing the black poisonous haze to crawl back out the door. Kyle then created a poisonous gas outside, a wind dome, and a net that held the black haze and absorbed it. After a few seconds, Kyle made the poison gas shrink in size, and Kyle ended up holding it in his hand, quite saying that he had compressed all the poisonous gas. A small black ball of smoke was flying in Kyle's hands. Kyle told everyone that it was a dangerous thing and asked them to leave it to him. Elise was stunned by his strength, not knowing what to say. Dale and Sykes stood behind Eliza, rejoicing and saying that Kyle, as always, did everything himself. Suddenly, Professor Alicia jumped towards Eliza, hugging her very tightly. Eliza was a little surprised by this gesture, then hugging back and worrying asked Professor Alicia if she was injured. To which Professor Alicia looked at Eliza with tear-stained eyes and said that she didn't care, and that Eliza was coughing up blood and asked her in surprise what she was doing. Eliza smiled gently at Professor Alicia and replied that she was fine and it was a little blood. The girl tries her best to calm the professor down so that she does not worry. But Professor Alicia, not calming down and holding Eliza's shoulders, displeased told her why she was constantly taking risks because of her. The professor feels very guilty about what happened. Professor Alicia lowered her head in sadness and, very displeased, asked Eliza what would happen if her body was injured. Elise stared at her, not knowing what to say. The heroes looked at them in confusion. Then, gathering herself, Eliza asked Professor Alicia for forgiveness. After that, Professor Alicia herself, having gathered herself, smiled slightly and asked the guys for forgiveness, saying that she had lost control a little. Dahlia and Katie waved them off with an awkward smile, saying that it was okay. Kyle looked at them and thought that looking at them, he immediately remembers himself and Milne's teacher. Kyle approached Eliza and the professor and asked them with a smile that they had a special bond. The girls, at the moment of these words, look at the hero with great surprise. Then Eliza says that this is indeed the case. Then the girl explains, saying that Professor Alicia is like an older sister and mother to her at the same time. Upon hearing these words, Kyle and his companions express great surprise on their faces. Eliza continued with tears in her eyes, saying that Professor Alicia adopted her when she was an orphan and always took care of her. Eliza told everyone with a happy smile that Professor Alicia had raised her with all her love. Therefore, the professor is a very important person to her. Professor Alicia, hearing such words in her mind, blushed while looking at Eliza. She was somewhat embarrassed to hear such words. After Eliza's story, Delia and Katie stood crying with emotion, while Kyle and Sykes stood looking at them in surprise. Eliza noticed all their reactions and awkwardly waved her hands asking them not to cry. Then Kyle came up to her and apologized for his sudden question about the connection with each other. Eliza smiled at him, telling him that she wasn't hiding it at all. Then Kyle suddenly bowed to Elise, thanking her and saying that thanks to her reaction, they were all saved. All the friends, having come to their senses, also began to thank Eliza in turn for their salvation. Eliza blushed with embarrassment and said that everything was fine, and turned to Professor Alicia and wanted to request support from her. The girl felt great discomfort from the large number of thanks. But the professor at that time ran into a secret room, curiously examining the stairs there. Eliza suddenly turned around and, seeing how Professor Alicia ran into the secret room, called out to her, worried. After that, Kyle and Daly came up to the secret room, looking inside the room, and it was also quite interesting to find out what was behind that door. Professor Alicia, Kyle, and Delia looked at the stairs that led straight down with curiosity. Kyle noted, saying that the stairs are very deep. Delia asked fearfully how many stairs there were. But Professor Alicia calmed everyone down by saying that everything was fine, and said very excitedly that the mysteries that lay ahead were beginning. Everyone shouted back joyfully and in agreement. Professor Alicia cheerfully and fervently led everyone along, saying that they would only go forward. Delia, looking at her, thought that after all, Kyle and Professor Alicia looked very much like each other. At this time, someone was following them deep into the secret room, watching and spying on them. This someone did not want to be noticed, so he walked away from the heroes. The door starts to close slowly. As a result, the door still closes completely, emitting huge clouds of dust and steam from under it. The heroes joyfully walked up the stairs, studying everything. They had a great desire to solve the mystery of the academy. Arriving at one of the rooms by the stairs, Professor Relisha and the others saw a large, spacious, empty room in front of them. Delia asked everyone in surprise what kind of room it was, but Katie noted that it was spacious. Professor Relisha noted curiously, saying that there must be a hidden passage here. Then the professor added, saying that this place is too big to search by hand, and asked Eliza to use magic glasses. Eliza agreed with the professor and put on her magic glasses. But then I was very surprised by what I saw through the glasses. Holding on to her glasses, Eliza was surprised to tell everyone that she could see the door. Professor Relisha was surprised that Eliza found this door so quickly. Eliza confirmed her words and then awkwardly added that something was confusing her. A look of surprise appeared on the girl's face. The girl says there are doors everywhere. With the help of magic glasses, Eliza saw a lot of doors in front of her. There was no limit to her surprise. Everyone was surprised to hear from Eliza, digesting what they heard. Professor Relisha asked Eliza in a loud, incomprehensible voice what this meant. Then Eliza gave her her magic glasses and asked her to try it herself. Professor Relisha, wearing glasses on top of her glasses, was very surprised by what she saw in front of her. Eliza was actively waving her hands, asking the professor what they would do about it. Professor Relisha, not knowing what to say, replied, puzzled, that the documents mentioned only one way out. Eliza and Kyle were surprised at this, not understanding the professor. Then the professor told everyone that all this means that only one door is correct and asked them to try to open everything, to which Eliza became worried and asked Professor Relisha to be careful. Suddenly, Professor Relisha went to one of the doors and opened it to see what was inside. At this time, the head of an evil goblin suddenly came out of the open door, screaming in a very terrible voice. Frightened by the monster, Professor Relisha convulsively closed the door, covering it with her body. Eliza looked at the professor, worried about her. At this time, Sykes thought that there were too many problems. Sykes wanted to pull his sword out of its scabbard, as at that moment Kyle destroyed the monster from the door invisible to them. Sykes was surprised and looked at Kyle. Then Sykes and the others called Kyle, asking him what it was just now. Kyle turned to them when he heard the question and did not know what to answer them. Then Sykes, approaching Kyle, asked him with displeasure that he also saw the doors. Kyle looked at Sykes awkwardly, not knowing what to say. Kyle scratched the back of his head, quietly saying that if he concentrated hard, he would be able to see the doors. Sykes wasn't too surprised by Kyle's words, saying that he knew it because it was Kyle. Next to Sykes was Delia, who was very surprised. Sykes told the fact that they would be able to find the right door faster, but Kyle, making a thoughtful face, said that there was one problem. He says there are clearly more than 1,000 doors here. Delia was very surprised by this fact, but a huge number of doors continued to surround the heroes. Then Delia, squatting down, began to fake tears, saying if they searched everyone, it would take a lot of time. Then Delia tentatively suggested that maybe the door was marked somehow. Kyle, hearing Dale's suggestion, thought a little. Kate was very cheerful and supportive and said that this stage had certainly been made passable and they would be able to pass it if they tried. There was a huge hope for this in the girl's eyes. Kyle was still thinking about what Delia and Katie had said about the markings on the door so that this stage could be passed. After a little thought, Kyle finally got something. Kyle happily thanked everyone for their suggestions and told Delia and Katie that, thanks to them, he knows what to do. Delia and Katie stared at Kyle blankly. Kyle thought in his mind that the last person to find the right door was Teacher Milna. Believing in himself, Kyle spread his arms and closed his eyes with concentration, thinking that he could follow the traces of Milne's magic. Eliza, wearing magic glasses, turned to Kyle, and looking through him, she admired the fact that Kyle's magic level was growing by the second. Professor Relisha came up to the watching Eliza and asked her what had happened. To which Alicia, without turning away from Kyle, replied that Kyle's magic covered the entire room. Elise was still looking at Kyle admiringly, thinking that his magic was still growing, and she couldn't believe in so much magic. And in the end, the girl wondered who Kyle was. "Kyle, all this time standing with his eyes closed and concentrating, his friend opened his eyes and with a smile told everyone that he had found traces of his teacher. Eliza and Professor Relisha looked at Kyle uncomprehendingly. Then Kyle replied clearly that he had found the right door. Kyle pointed to one of the doors with a slight smile, saying that he was the right one. Eliza and Professor Relisha immediately looked where Kyle was pointing and agreed that there was a door there. Kyle mentally said with a smile that he had found the right door. Kyle looked at the magic signature on the correct door and mentally thanked Milne's teacher for her magic signature that she left there. Kyle happily turned to Professor Relisha, saying that whoever found the right door left a signature here in order to find it again in the future. Professor Relisha understood him and awkwardly nodded at his words. After that, Professor Relisha was very happy, loudly saying that it was so amazing and great, to which Kyle informed everyone that he was opening the right door. Kyle opened the right door in front of them and saw clouds and high cliffs in front of him. After going through the right door, they all found themselves on a high cliff, almost above the level of the clouds. Everyone started to look around the area in surprise and admire its beauty. Delia commented that this is a very beautiful place, and Eliza added saying that this place is like a utopia. Various small spheres with wind, lightning, and other elements were flying near them. Delia noticed these spheres and asked Professor Relicious what they were, to which Professor Relisha replied that these are spheres with different elements inside. Kate and Professor Relisha tried to touch the spheres, watching them admiringly. The others also looked down, which made Delia's knees tremble from such a height. After the inspection, everyone began to slowly move forward along the cliff. Then another door appeared in front of them. Kyle assumed that this door was the third one from the beginning. Delia also confirmed his words, agreeing with him. Professor Relisha came to the door, opening it and saying that if everything was as in the documents, then a maze was waiting for them. At this time, a large building with a maze appeared behind the open door. He was just huge compared to the heroes. Professor Relisha turned to everyone and seriously warned that there must be a lot of dangerous monsters here, and those who came in, the girl paused. She then finished her sentence by saying that those who had gone so far were missing here. Kate was very surprised by her words, and Delia trembled with fear and disbelief. Then, calming everyone down, Eliza put on magic glasses and told everyone that they should be more careful. While saying these words, the girl adjusted her magic glasses. At this time, Sykes was banging on the wall, or rather on the bricks and pushing it, feeling something. Eliza noticed Sykes and called him anxiously. Then Sykes replied that the walls were made of marble and that it should work for them. Sykes turned to Kyle, asking him what he had found there. Kyle was standing at this time, holding the walls with his hands and feeling the presence of monsters with his magic. After Sykes' question, Kyle told him that there were a lot of monsters here, but the room was not as big as the last one. Eliza listened to their conversation and anxiously asked them what they were up to. Then Kyle answered Eliza with his eyes closed that they had a plan. Eliza was surprised and asked again about the plan. The girl was quite interested in this. Kyle then explained to Elise that they had come here without full information, but the existence of the maze and the monsters had been confirmed, so they came up with a plan to deal with them. After explaining the whole situation, Kyle pointed to one place saying that the exit was that way. Elise looked blankly where Kyle was pointing. Kyle then signaled Sykes to start doing his thing. Sykes calmly agreed and pulled his sword out of its scabbard. He put it to himself and closed his eyes and began to concentrate. Elise looked at Sykes through her magic glasses and was surprised that Sykes' magic level had started to rise. But suddenly, Professor Relisha wanted to run to them, asking Kyle what they were thinking about. But Katie grabbed her, holding her back and saying that it was dangerous there. Elise looked at Sykes' magic, which materialized into a huge dragonfire spirit, and was surprised by it. After opening his eyes and controlling his magic, Sykes informed Kyle that he was done. Kyle looked at Sykes with a smile and said that now was the time for their combination. Then Sykes and Kyle simultaneously shouted their spell, combining them. For Sykes, it was a fiery blade, and for Kyle, it was a hurricane. Sykes swung his sword forward, directing his magic forward, and Kyle's hurricane increased Sykes' damage 1,000-fold. With this powerful combination, they burned a hole in the walls of the maze. Their strength put together was incredible. The stones flew apart at this action. The flow of Manga was like a hurricane. At this time, everyone looked at them in surprise and silently admired their strength. After the spell, the smoke gradually cleared and Kyle and Sykes appeared in front of them. Kyle pointed out the way through the walls and invited everyone to go to the next test. Eliza was in a stunning state from such a powerful combination, and Professor Relisha looked at Kyle and Sykes and thought that it was amazing, and it was the first time she had seen such magic. At this time, Kyle and Sykes were giving each other high fives and rejoicing with the spell. Meanwhile, at the very depth of the seal, due to the powerful spell of Kyle and Sykes, there was a small earthquake which caused various cracks to appear on the walls and on the columns. The black and dark dragon seal that stood in the middle of this room crackled and began to release its dark energies, from which the dragon, which had been under the seal for a long time, woke up from a dream. Everyone present passed through the hole in the wall, thereby passing through the maze. Professor Relisha happily said that they had passed the maze, then added saying that the method was very difficult. Kyle turned to Sykes and winked at him, saying that they worked great. Sykes replied to Kyle with a slight smile that he was just following his plan. Sykes did not even think that with the help of Kyle's wind, it was possible to strengthen his flame. Katie, who was standing behind them and watching Kyle and Sykes, remembered how Kyle had said in the past that they would solve the riddle together, and how Sykes had asked them that they had already survived a deadly fight. Katie, becoming more and more disappointed in herself, thought about what she should do, because if everything goes on like this, she will only get in the way. But at that moment, a strong wind blew right in front of Kyle, Sykes, and Eliza. Looking ahead, they saw a large hurricane in front of them. Professor Relisha did not understandingly ask everyone that this was a new test. Dahlia was still on his feet, and holding on to Kyle said he was going to be blown away. Kyle, on the other hand, stood watching the hurricane with interest and did not move. And next to them, covering his face, was Sykes, who said that there was something in this wind. Professor Relisha, standing behind Eliza, thought that the document said that this was an elemental zone. Then she noted to herself that there was nothing but wind here and suggested calling it a tornado zone. Delia complained, saying they couldn't move on. Then Kyle came forward and pointing his hand at the tornado, he told everyone not to panic and be with him. Elise looked at Kyle in surprise, calling out to him. Kyle directed his hand to the top and used the wind wall spell. Then Delia looked around and noticed that the wind had stopped. The characters looked at Kyle in surprise. Professor Relisha, as always, admired Kyle's abilities, and Kyle happily told everyone to go ahead with him. But suddenly, Kyle was called by Sykes. Kyle turned to him and asked him what was the matter. At the moment of this question, the young man's face was serious. Then Sykes replied to Kyle that, theoretically, the earth should be used against the wind. Sykes then asked Kyle that he could use earth magic, to which Kyle stuttered a little, asking Sykes how he knew. Sykes told him that the magic that Kyle used in the forest, or rather, that spell, the young man was pausing. He then clarifies that this is a holy circle spell. It is not only light magic, but also its combination with earth magic. Sykes looked at Kyle, asking if that was the case, to which Kyle was very happy and confirmed all his words, saying that Sykes was so smart and he understood everything with a cursory glance. Katie, who was standing nearby, was very surprised by this, asking herself if it was true. Then Katie clutched her head and mentally began to complain, saying that she didn't understand it at all, and she was even more useless than she thought. Katie thought she was always being rescued, but she was just getting in the way. At this time, Katie's attention was attracted by the words of Kyle, who said that he only uses the wind because he promised the teacher. He then adds that if it is not an emergency, then he has the right to use only wind magic. Then, not understanding him, Sykes asked again about the emergency situation, to which Kyle agreed, and, as an example, he said with a smile that an emergency situation is when he protects friends. Katie was very surprised by what she heard and didn't say anything. Her face expressed intense surprise and incomprehension. Kyle, not noticing anything, continued to happily say that this was quite an interesting test for him. Sykes thought about Kyle's words and muttered to himself that it also sounded interesting. What if he also somehow limited himself? But suddenly, at this time, Dahlia's scream was heard, which pointed to something. Eliza and Professor Relisha looked at the source of the sound, not understanding what was happening. Then Delia pointed to the top and said that small bubbles were flying around them. Everyone looked up and saw a lot of different bubbles in the sky. Professor Relisha asked in surprise what it was. Kyle also stood there, looking at these bubbles in surprise. Kyle noticed that the wind had stopped and informed everyone about it, to which Professor Relisha asked him in surprise if it was true. And having calmed down a little, Professor Relisha looked at the sky, which had a lot of different bubbles, and asked everyone what kind of changes they were. Eliza, who was looking up at the bubbles, suddenly noticed something in the sky. Eliza, a little worried, called Professor Relisha and asked her about what was in the sky there. Then everyone, Professor Relisha and the others, looked up to where Eliza pointed. A very large, dark hand appeared in the sky, approaching them very menacingly. Delia was very much frightened by this dark hand and asked everyone with fear that it was a hand made of fire. Then Professor Relisha thought in her mind that the magic of the wind was gone and bubbles of fire appeared. Professor Relisha thought about how the elements change every time, and she finally understood why it was all because of this. Then Professor Relisha thought that this was all an elemental zone. In a panic and agitation, Professor Relisha ordered everyone to flee from the dark hand. A dark hand from the sky had almost approached them to grab them all. Then Eliza ran in the other direction, and Delia ran away with tears in his eyes wherever his eyes looked. At this time, Sykes ran forward, about to unsheath his sword. Delia looked after Sykes in surprise as he ran away. Sykes pulled his sword out of its scabbard very quickly and thought that fighting fire with fire was wrong, but Sykes was sure that he could push the dark hand away with his fire magic. Suddenly, Katie stood in front of Sykes. Sykes looked at her blankly, stopping in the middle. At this time, Katie took her small wooden magic wand and pointed it at the dark hand that was approaching them. Then he called her by name. Then Katie looked at Sykes and told him that her element was water. Katie told Sykes that he could handle it and asked him to step away. Then Sykes anxiously shouted at Katie not to do anything stupid. Then he added, saying that even with the elemental advantage, this is too dangerous an opponent. The young man was very worried about the girl. Turning her back on Sykes and holding a wooden magic wand in front of her, Katie firmly told him that he had to. Sykes was very much surprised by this word from Katie, not understanding her. Then Katie continued saying that she wants to protect her friends. And then, with her wand, she created a water ball and shot it into the dark, fiery hand.